but hopefully very fruitful agenda for us today. And I really appreciate our hosts, and we'll get a chance to hear from them here in just a moment. I'm Lorraine Martin, for those of you who I haven't got a chance to meet, and I'm the current president and CEO of the National Safety Council. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to chair the coalition. This is my first coalition meeting. We had a steering group meeting this morning, and we've had several of those since I started my tenure here as the CEO, but this is the first actual coalition meeting. So thank you so much for joining us today. Our goal of everybody in this room is to keep people safe so they can live their full lives and they can go on their business, roadway, whether they're in a car or in some other mode of transportation or on their own 2 feet, and come home safely to do the things that they need to do every day. And I know that everybody in this room is wholly committed to that mission. So thank you so much for being here. If you go to my first chart, I don't know who's driving charts. Is anybody here driving charts? We'll get that logistics taken care of here. Here we go. Thank you so much. Well, it's not good to look at yourself, but I come to the National Safety Council after a career in aerospace and defense. I was 35 years in both Lockheed Martin and the U.S. Air Force. And while I wasn't directly working on roadway safety, I certainly was working with operations that required all of our employees to be safe, not only when they were driving on behalf of our mission, but also in creating our products. And then very importantly, the products that helped our warfighters do what we asked them to do as a country and come home safely. One of the things that's been very important to me throughout my career is what you see on the top here, every commitment every day. And I know that this coalition and all the member companies and the individuals here in the room and those that you represent are focused on ensuring that our commitment is there to keep people safe on roadways every day and every opportunity that we get. So from that perspective, I'm really proud to be representing all of you and supporting all of you in this joint mission. You can go to my next chart. We will be talking today about the transportation priorities that the coalition has set down. But I will just open this meeting by letting you know that I have just had the opportunity to brief the National Safety Council board members on our next 5-year strategy for the council. And we have chosen to take the Road to Zero framework, which you see listed here, and we're going to hear from some folks that have been actually helping us on each of these 3 dimensions. But we're going to be using that framework to organize all of the council's roadway safety related activities. It felt like the right framework to have. If this august group of folks and the folks that we hired to help us really understand this problem said this is the right way for us to really divide and conquer against the issue of roadway safety with a goal of 0 deaths in our future, we chose to use that as the same way for us to organize our initiative. We'll start to hear and see the council representing what we're doing along these 3 dimensions, as well as the coalition here. We are going to get a chance to hear from the working groups. If you can go back 1 chart, just a moment, please. Across each of these, we have working groups that are coming together to put together initiatives across all of our organizations to try to move us forward on these 3 pillars. But before we get to any of that, we have some speakers here today that I'd like to let you know about. First, I'd like to thank the National League of Cities for this incredible venue. We also had our steering committee in their facilities up above, and I'll introduce their host here in just a moment. And we also have James Owens here, the acting NHTSA administrator. So thank you, sir, for being here. We've had a chance to meet just a bit ago, and his initiatives and his focus on behalf of our government and our nation is so important, and we'll get a chance to hear from him as well. But as I said, we have 3 working groups along Double Down, Accelerating Technology, and Prioritizing Safety, and we'll hear from each of those working group chairs today as well. They'll also be discussing the work that you hear today at an upcoming event that's going to be in Richmond, Virginia in May of later this year, the Safer Roads Conference. I'm going to guess that many of us will be participating in the Safer Roads Conference in May. It'll be another chance for us to bring the Road to Zero initiatives to a greater community. And now can you go to the next chart? So just to talk a little bit about where we have been as the coalition. The coalition today has 1,536 members. That has grown actually over the last year, not doubling, but coming pretty close to that, of folks that have said that they too are in this world to help with roadway safety, whatever that perspective might be, and have chosen to be part of this coalition as we move together in our coordinated efforts. So that's a really amazing thing to do. The thing that for us all to think about today, as we hear from our working groups and we hear from some of the other participants in this world, is how can we use that power of 1,536 organizations to really make a difference. And it is going to take all of us. It's going to take collaboration, and it's going to take ensuring that we're leveraging the efforts of others in the work that we do. So I really do lay down that challenge of us to think about that throughout the next couple of hours. These groups represent all kinds of organizations, as you see there, from advocacy, associations. We have many of them represented here today, businesses, public health, and of course, government, both at the federal, state, and local levels. So a really rich set of colleagues for us to be collaborating with on this initiative. We also, this last year, in addition to adding a significant number of members to the coalition, we created a communications committee. And they're here today. They're going to be meeting tomorrow from some of the representatives of the organizations in the room to really talk about how we get the work of the coalition out to the broadest set of ears and eyes so that we can have impact. So at the end, I will give you another call to action. And if there's things that you think our communications committee can be doing for you, please let us know. And I'll give you a website to do that. We've been expanding our webinars and resources to better help all of you. That's all posted on a website, again, that I'll give you the access to. In addition, with all of the grant work that we've been doing for some projects to share best practices and make sure that we truly are leveraging some of the initiatives that are going on throughout our Safe Systems Innovative Grants. I think on my next chart, if you go to that, just a little bit of sort of background here before we get rolling. We've actually, in 2019, the first 6 months, we have had some good progress in reducing deaths in our nation, which is wonderful. But any good progress means we have to just say, okay, how do we make that happen? And how do we make sure that those initiatives continue to happen? And then what more can we do? Because we know that any one death is more than we find acceptable. The way to look at this chart, though, is anything that's purple or blue, and the key there, if you can see it, the negative 17, 17 to 10, and then 9 to 0, all of those colors means that deaths have actually reduced and declined from the 2018 numbers. And this is data that we are getting from NHTSA, thank you. And for the second straight year, we have had some declines. Not everywhere. You can see some of the red and kind of pinkish color. Those are still places where fatalities have been increasing, but the overall trend is in the right direction, which is really great. And I know it's because of all of the activities of the folks in this room and across the coalition. But our goal is to continue to make that map turn even more purple and continue to get the deaths to go to 0, and that's going to take a significant amount of initiative. I will share with you also that we're showing an overall 3% decrease in the first 6 months of 2019. 3% decrease is notable. That's fairly large. And again, the question is going to be, what's making that happen? How do we continue to make sure we see that? And then just make sure we take it that next step further. The final point I'll make here, if you can go back one chart, thank you, is that several states are following in Utah's footsteps and have started to consider addressing and reducing the legal BAC levels, which is another important way for us to look at addressing alcohol-related deaths, which we know still are a fairly large part of the fatalities that we see across our nation. And for those of you who are from these states, I know I saw New York earlier, New York, Michigan, Oregon, California, Virginia, Vermont, and Hawaii all are at least considering these. And these are places where our voice is being added. We have recently, under my signature, sent some notes to some of the leaders in those states to really encourage them to take their consideration to actual action and to change the blood alcohol level requirement for drunk driving. So a lot of great efforts. We had a steering committee meeting this morning. We go around the table at the end of that, and it's just amazing to hear what everyone is doing and how we most importantly can leverage the initiatives of members across the coalition to have an even louder voice and more impact. Now the next chart. We also would like to show you a little bit about what's going on with our Vision Zero cities, when you're going to hear a little bit about that today too. That core set of 10 cities is now at 40 nationwide, which is fantastic. They are focusing on all kinds of issues, but distracted driving remains strong there as well. And our Towards Zero Deaths, the National Strategy for Highway Safety, has also made some great progress in creating traffic safety culture at the local level. and supporting various other community-related implementations. So I encourage you to make sure you're staying abreast of those initiatives. And again, we're going to hear from some of those folks here later today in the program. Next chart. Another thing that came out fairly recently, and hopefully everyone got a chance to see it, and the Department of Transportation, thank you to them, and for those of you who are representing them here today, also joined on to this effort. And this is to come up with some common nomenclature for advanced driver assistance systems. Right now, a lot of our manufacturers and the OEMs are calling these very important safety features all kinds of words that truthfully cause confusion for consumers. And in many cases, consumers are so flummoxed about what this is that their car is doing that they turn them off. And we know how empowering that safety feature is for roadway safety. And so one of the initiatives that we did with several coalition members, most notably the National Safety Council, AAA, who's here today, Consumer Reports, and JD Power, was to publish a set of common nomenclature around this technology. And if you haven't seen that, please let us know. We're hoping that that will really help not only with consumer confidence, but consumer knowledge, and then actually the adoption of some of these very important safety technologies. But we have to do more, and that's what we're going to be here to talk to you about a little today. You go to my next chart. We have had these Safe System Innovation Grants now for 3 years. And we have been able to share the results of those, and we've been doing that through webinars and also some of their reports. If you haven't had a chance to peruse those, I encourage you to do so. The coalition has really made these grants possible and these initiatives possible. We are in the final of our 3rd year of these, and you can see that in 2019. All of those grants have been issued, and we'll start to work with those folks to get their final reports and actually have those published as well. We will be looking for another approach to doing our grants and our initiatives, and also to obtain funding for those. So the steering committee is currently in discussions about what the right next step is after this series of grants, and stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to share some of that with the broader coalition as that gets defined. So the next chart. So again, thank you for being here today. We're going to have 2 sets of presenters and also 2 keynote speakers here for you in just a moment. You are continuing to inspire, to instruct, and inform, and innovate the people that you support in your organizations and your communities. And with that, you are saving lives. I have no question and no doubt of that. We're all here to make sure that people can live their fullest lives, and things that they didn't intend don't happen to them. And they get to go home to their families, to their employment, to the things that bring them joy, without having to worry about whether or not they can traverse safely around our country on behalf of their employment. So thank you. There will be some question time during this. Our keynote speakers here, our 2 key speakers, they are not going to take questions. But after we do some of the committee chairs and then our panel, we'll have time for question and answer. And I encourage you to please be bold and be courageous. With that, I'll first invite our first guest up here, and that is my pleasure to introduce our host, Irma Esparza Diggs. She is our Senior Executive and Director of the Federal Advocacy and National League of Cities, and we are in her home, in her house. We want to thank her again for enabling us to be here. Her role is spearheading and elevating the organization's grassroots and lobbying efforts on behalf of NLC's members and cities around the country, and elevating the reach of local elected officials across the country. So with that, please welcome Irma.
All good afternoon. First, thank you, Lorraine, for coming here and having this important meeting here. And congratulations to all of you for doubling the size of your coalition. That means that we are really working towards saving lives each and every day on our road. So I appreciate you. National League of Cities, this is our headquarters. This is the home away from home for the leaders of our cities, towns, and villages. This is where we advocate for them every day with the administration and with Congress. It is so great to welcome you, our safety partners, here to the National League of Cities. thank you for the work that you are doing. Appreciate you working closely with us as an organization, but other key stakeholders, because as we all know, we can't do this work alone. Working with you, our city leaders, Congress, and federal agency partners, we really can change the trajectory and ensure that everyone makes it home at the end of the day. As we saw with Kobe Bryant, I know he was on a helicopter, but in an instant, everyone's life can change, and that impact, regardless of who they are, is significant. So thank you. We will continue to work together, and please continue as a partner. Consider us as a partner, because really 0 is the only acceptable number of deaths on our roads, because in my family and your family, we're on them every day. So thank you again for being here. You are going to hear from cities like Cleveland and San Antonio. San Antonio is also here today. They have a huge delegation also doing meetings this week on the Hill. They're stepping up, and they are striving to achieve 0 toward Vision 0. And I know they're excited to hear, to share with you what they're doing, but also to learn from you. So I know that you're going to have a successful meeting. Please, our house is your house, and I look forward to you having a productive meeting and continuing to work with you. Thank you.
For this next speaker, thank you for turning that on. And again, we won't be taking questions here. We will for the next few, but please have your ears ready. We're going to get a chance to now hear from James Owen, the Acting Administrator for the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration. NHTSA, as I've been instructed to call that long name, has been a partner not only of the coalition, but to many of us as we have been looking at this issue of safety on our roads. And they are singularly focused on this issue. Their initiatives, whether they're in cars, pedestrians, hot cars, all of the different initiatives that they have spearheaded have been so important to, I know the council, but I know a lot of the folks in the room here today, because our voices get louder when we can put them together. And it is often a place to help us bring our voices together. The acting administrator, Owens, previously served as the Deputy General Counsel of the DOT and was an attorney at the Federal Energy Regulation Commission. Please welcome James Owens.
Thank you all very much for this invitation. And Lorraine, it's really great to see you again. Irma, thanks to you and the National League of Cities. What a great building. This is really neat. And those of you who are either here or online, welcome and thank you for your commitment to the road to 0. So this month, February, marks 6 months since I joined NHTSA as the acting administrator. And by the way, I'm still drinking from a fire hose. But I'm really pleased to be able to be here and have a chance to speak with you today. Your mission is close to the hearts of not only me, but every single man and woman who works at NHTSA. We all come to work, 600 FTEs. We all come to work every day looking to advance safety. As you know, NHTSA is a data-driven organization. We must understand the scope of an issue if we're to solve it. I know that many of you use data from NHTSA's National Center for Statistical Analysis, which is a global leader of traffic fatality data collection, something I'm very proud of, and I think our team does an amazing job. Our 2018 FARS data was very encouraging. 2.4% reduction over 2017, and the early returns for 2019, as Lorraine was just mentioning, are very encouraging. Marks 3 straight years, hopefully, of declines. That is tremendous news. But now the bad news. That still means in 2018, we lost 36,560 people on our roads. Every death is not a statistic. Every death is a man, a woman, a child who had family, friends, colleagues, peers. And we not only have they lost their loved ones, but we've all lost the incredible potential that every life holds. It's simply unacceptable that we lose so many lives on our roads every year. And I can tell you that Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao feels the same way. We will not be satisfied until our fatality number drops to 0. Under Secretary Chow's leadership, the Department of Transportation is addressing this issue in several ways, including infrastructure, behavioral changes, and technology. NHTSA is working closely with our counterparts at Federal Highway Administration, hi Cheryl, and other DOT modes on ways that our agencies can work together and collaborate and mutually achieve our safety goal. There's a lot of opportunity across DOT to partner and find new ways to solve old problems. In particular, we're planning several events across the country this year to bring attention to pedestrian and bicycle issues. When I mentioned 2.4% reduction in fatalities, that's a good news nationwide, but hidden in that data is an increase in pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities. Our vulnerable road users, we need to do what we can to protect them. One thing we all have to do is find ways, working together, to ensure that everybody is sharing the road responsibly. In fact, we had one event with Federal Highways and the Federal Transit Administration in Denver recently to celebrate that city's Vision Zero initiative. And it's going to take collaboration and cooperation, not only at DOT, but at every level of government to solve this issue. And, of course, with the help of safety partners like each of you. NHTSA's approach to road safety mirrors that of the Road to Zero pillars, doubling down on what works, accelerating advanced technology, and of course, prioritizing safety. We know what works. There are many proven ways that people can reduce their risk on our roads. Most of these are common sense. Wear your seatbelts every trip, every time. My 3-year-old son, now 4-year-old son, got a DOT calendar when he was little and learned one line from it: buckle up, no excuses. So he reminds me every time I get in the car. That's something that we can all ensure that our fellow citizens are engaged in, buckling up. What else? Drive sober. Put down the phone. Slow down. If you're on a motorcycle or a bicycle, wear a helmet. Stay alert at all times. Simple, common sense messages, but if everybody complied with them, we'd save tens of thousands of lives on our roads every year. Many of our proven strategies are contained in our Countermeasures That Work report. Other agencies have similar publications. Federal Highways has the Proven Safety Countermeasures, for example. We are constantly driving these messages through our consumer communications and supporting state highway safety offices, local and national partners, and of course, law enforcement, who can help and do help echo these messages. But we can't do it alone. Safety advocates, like all of you in the Road to Zero initiative, can help share best practices and new countermeasures that we're all working on. One example of how we're doubling down is our new partnership on pediatric vehicular hyperthermia, or heat stroke. Many of you in this room are involved in that initiative, and I'm especially thankful to Tareen Kreppe with Safe Kids Worldwide for her leadership and partnership in this important endeavor. This year, we've moved National Heat Stroke Prevention Day up to May 1st. We want to start pushing our message before the hottest day of the year. We need all the partners that we can get to share that message. It's too important to keep this to ourselves. If we get this message out, we can save the lives of little children. What's more important than that? And if you're not familiar with the campaign, it's very simple. Park, look, then lock. Please visit our partnership website at, I'll get this wrong, but I'll try to get it right, cpsboard.org/heatstroke. If you want to learn how you can be a hero for little children. It's not too late to start planning and reaching out to folks in your communities who can help in this very important initiative. Another example of doubling down on what works is our overall impaired driving campaign. We have a long established and fruitful relationship with many safety advocates, including MAD and the National Safety Council, to address all forms of impaired driving. Over this past weekend, we promoted our Fans Don't Let Fans Drive Drunk campaign. You're all familiar with our Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaign. We've paired that with our drug impaired component, which is If you feel different, you drive different. And of course, you may have seen recently, last fall, our our ads about over-the-counter and prescription medications. If your drug says don't operate heavy machinery, that includes your 4,000-pound vehicle. So simply put, impairment is impairment. Doesn't matter what the substance is. Impairment is impairment. Maintaining strong partnerships with folks on the ground is a critical part of what we do. That may be law enforcement, where we're partnering with the International Association of Chiefs of Police to provide grants to expand access to training for drug recognition experts. And one thing I can note is last week, we had an online tool that just went live. It's an online resource tool for drug recognition experts around the country. And this tool will help our DREs around the country perform their jobs more capably and will help us collect more granular information about where we're seeing the problem, because the better information we have about where the problem is, the better we can counter it. We provide training to leaders in the criminal justice community, including judges and prosecutors, on impaired driving detection and adjudicating impaired driving arrests. We also support the first responder community, including EMS personnel, as well as fire personnel, firemen, as well as police officers. We can't do what we know works without the work of our partners, and that includes those of you in this room. And that brings me to the second pillar, accelerating advanced technology. We believe that technology can and will play a large role in preventing crashes and saving lives. Widespread adoption of new safety features like automatic emergency braking is important and is something we highly encourage. The early returns on this technology are very, very encouraging. And we just announced a couple weeks ago at TRB that we're starting what we call phase 2 of our parts initiative, which is working with the OEMs to collect data on the effectiveness of these advanced technologies. And when we get that data, we're gonna be able to share it with the public. The more the public knows about how these advanced technologies work, the more they know about how effective they can be, the better off they're gonna be, because they can make their purchasing decisions. One aspect of technology that holds particular promise is vehicle to everything communications technology, or V2X. V means vehicle, X means everything. A couple of weeks ago, Secretary Chow announced a $38 million pilot program to equip emergency response vehicles and highway infrastructure with V2X hardware. What can V2X do? V2X is a way that cars, vehicles can communicate with each other, or they can communicate with the infrastructure. And the kinds of information that they can collect, the kinds of information that the traffic management centers can use to improve safety, as well as traffic flow management, are amazing. It's our hope that V2X and the safety band it uses can help address serious issues with first responders. Each year, there are an estimated 46,000 crashes, 17,000 serious injuries, and nearly 150 fatalities involving emergency response vehicles. These are the men and women, the brave men and women who risk their lives to protect the rest of us. So it's our turn to protect them. The Secretary and I believe that V2X has incredible life-saving potential for both the emergency response community and the traveling public. When the signalized intersections are rolled out, when the traffic lights are equipped with V2X, guess what? Every one of you will be able to buy a vehicle equipped with the technology and take advantage of it as well. And the more our vehicles are communicating with each other, the safer we're going to be. This technology, I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, but I will mention one thing because it always amazes me. It gives you Superman powers. You can see through buildings and around a corner. So if you're coming up to that blind turn in a city, you can't see around the corner, your vehicle will tell you another car is approaching. And if a pedestrian is carrying a device that has this kind of technology, your vehicle will see the pedestrian as well. This is amazing technology. It's the technology of the future we were promised. I envision a day when V2X can alert a driver, as I said, a pedestrian in the roadway or perhaps a median or cresting a hill. You can't see, you're coming over a hill, you can't see the pedestrian, but your vehicle knows he or she is there. And this can help prevent many catastrophic crashes. Finally, we have our third pillar, prioritizing safety. Safety is literally in our name as an agency. It's what we do. And of course, it's why you're all here as well. Secretary Chow, since the day she came to DOT, has reminded all of us that safety is priority number one at DOT. And of course, that's something we at NHTSA very much share. Per her leadership, we have focused on several key areas, including pedestrian and rural road safety. NHTSA now has a vulnerable road users working group that's meeting regularly. And as I mentioned earlier, we're doing several collaborative events with federal highways across the country to bring attention to pedestrian and bicyclist safety concerns. In my opinion, we can never remind drivers too many times of the need to share the road. When I came into government, I learned two things very quickly. Number one, there's no such thing as a good surprise. And number two, there's no such thing as over-communication. That's what we're in the business of right now. We're going to over-communicate this. One area of particular concern is rural road safety. The statistics here, as many of you know, are very alarming. According to the census, 19% of Americans live in rural areas, but 46% of our traffic fatalities occur in rural areas. And that's one reason why DOT has launched the Rural Opportunities for You to Use Transportation for Economic Success, or ROUTS initiative, or routes, depending on which part of the country you're from. This initiative is needed for the nation's economy because, of course, we have to move freight. But more importantly, it's important for safety. By using a systems approach and bringing in partners like EMS, transit, rail, and of course our traditional safety partners, we can make an outsized difference in making rural roads safer for everyone. And remember, although the 46% of fatalities are occurring in rural areas, and only 19% of people live in rural areas, close to 50% of fatalities in rural areas are from people who live in urban areas. Because of course, if you live in an urban area, you probably spend some time driving across rural areas. So this is safety for everyone. So as you know, prioritizing safety and building collaboration into the way we work requires a culture change. A change in the way we speak, crashes, not accidents. A change in the way we work, together, not separately. And a change in the way we live, everybody sharing the road responsibly, mindful of all road users. And it will take all of us working together, sharing ideas, creating and supporting innovation to reach what we are trying to reach here, which is zero. But I know that this is something that we can do. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to make these advancements. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Inspiring. Thank you so much, Administrator Owens. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, all of us have been touched by NHTSA and their campaigns. And clearly, as he just outlined, a lot of the initiatives that are in the future for not only his organization, but us are really, truly right in the middle of the three pillars that we've defined for Road to Zero. So thank you. He had another engagement, which is one of the reasons we couldn't do questions and answers today. But I do know he is passionate, as you can just see from that presentation, about this topic. And I know he'll be back to talk to us again soon. The next thing we're going to do here on our agenda is to hear from each of our three committee chairs, our leaders who are working the specific activities in each of our three pillars: the double down on what works, accelerating technology, and prioritizing safety. Each one of them is going to come up here and give about a 15-minute presentation of where we are. And then at the end, I guess we'll take some questions and answers, but we'll try to get through all three of those presentations. The last one has two speakers, so I think we cheated and gave them a little bit extra time to share with you what they're doing. But for that, though, I'm going to introduce all three of them now, and I'll ask each one to come up Alex down the front here is going to be our timekeeper to let you know when you're out of your time, but we look forward to hearing about your great work. We are going to hear from 3 great leaders today. The first one on Double Down on What Works is Dia Gaynor. She's from the National Association of State Emergency and Medical Service Officials. She must have just loved what she heard about some of those emergency vehicles. I don't know where you are, Dia, right here in front of me, but that sounds like a great initiative for connecting us in with some of that technology. Our next speaker is going to be David Harkey, and he's from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and he's going to talk to us a bit about advanced technology and accelerating the adoption. And then finally, Prioritizing Safety with Jeff Piniati, and he's going to have a guest speaker as well, and he's from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. So again, we'll have them come up and speak, and then we'll have a chance for any kinds of questions and answers when they're finished with their presentation. So I will ask Dia to come up here first and share with us their progress. Be careful.
Speaking of safety, looking for a handrail. Oh, good afternoon. Okay, it's the post-lunch high blood glucose levels kicking in. I'll see what I can do to wake everybody up. It's my understanding I've got a clicker. It's set to stun. Don't be concerned. I just want to talk briefly about our, whoops, see how good that is? Really want to talk about this effort to double down on what works. How many of you have read the Road to Zero report? All right, I love when I see that. Any of you who didn't raise your hand, you go read it. One of the concepts, one of the sort of cornerstones of frustration, really, for the entire Road to Zero coalition has been the fact that there are things that we know make a difference. And your list may be different than the person's list next to you, and because each of us from our respective disciplines, of course, have our relative focus areas. But in total, all of those things done more, or as Mr. Owens referenced, done every time, can make a difference. So the objective of the working group is to look across some publications that have already been developed, some that maybe we weren't even aware of, and try to really create a collective compilation of what has been demonstrated to work. First and foremost, anything evidence-based, where there's research behind it. And create a collaborative environment, and I'll illustrate this for you in a second, where more information that might originate within one, I won't say silo, but pillar of an organization can be more broadly transmitted, not just to the individuals with which that organization normally communicates. To identify the basis for new research needs, and to be as multidisciplinary as possible across design and engineering issues, law enforcement, pre-hospital and emergency medical services, and trauma care, which is the world I live in, and consumer education and prevention efforts. So the starting point for this working group is really just this short list, but what I'd like to take advantage of the podium time here to talk about is help us expand this list. What other documents, what other resources, what other compilations of information are you aware of that should get added to this, if you will, virtual library, which is a key starting point for our working group to compile? And I'll talk briefly about each of these in case anybody's not familiar with them. First of all, Towards Zero Deaths. This is a really, really important initiative that began back in 2009. It was a small group of less than 10 national organizations who said, you know, we need a national strategy. We need to clearly articulate what the steps, what the tasks, what the activities are that could bring about a difference in an environment to reach zero. And that document is available. It looks like it's occluded here by the logo, but that reads www.towardzerodeaths.org, can be downloaded there. And the key was to say collectively, this can be and should be adopted as a national strategy by all organizations, not just the ones who are seated at the table. It includes, and subsequent work has been performed that you can view and download and use from the website related to case studies and implementation materials. So there's a wealth of information there. Another resource is Countermeasures That Work. And Countermeasures That Work is really, it's a NHTSA publication, and true to NHTSA form, involves 5-star ratings of various countermeasures related to impaired driving, restraint use, aggressive driving, speeding, and so forth, and across all types of roadway users. And really the value in this particular document, where it includes case studies and implementation materials as well, it gets to the effectiveness and use and cost and some of the issues that are of such interest to policymakers and others who are responsible for long-term planning. So there's 2 big documents. Well, there's a third in federal highways, proven safety countermeasures. This document was last updated in 2017. Its goal is to encourage widespread implementation by all entities, state, local, tribal, and others, where the findings were that these were sort of high promise, evidence-based interventions, but for some perplexing reason have kind of a low deployment level across the nation. So that's yet another resource. And then in FMCSA, the Our Roads, Our Safety campaign and its materials, which really encourages, sharing the road safely, work zone safety, which is very near and dear to those of us in the emergency response field, having to spontaneously set up work zones, in the middle of or on the side of a road without much advance notice. General safety for truck drivers and motor carriers. Again, a lot of good resources there. And then finally, as has already been mentioned, the Vision Zero network and the interesting combination of focus areas to include not only the conventional, traffic engineering and law enforcement colleagues, but also public health and policy and advocacy. So they have a tremendous amount of resources as well. So we're faced with, having already 5 books on the shelf, if you will, but how do we take those, add to those, and then turn them into something that can help educate and mobilize individuals on this subject, especially where they come from a perspective that perhaps your organization never really thought about or never really considered as an important factor in traffic safety. So we're finishing up with the composition of this working group. We will be meeting monthly by teleconference to talk more about not only how to assemble these kinds of resources so they're all in one place and you don't have to go and look at 6, 7, 8 different organizations to drill in to find one. It's my vision that we create a home for all of these resources, whether they're generated by the federal government, national organizations, coalitions, and any other type of group. And our first meeting hopefully will be the end of February. So I'm a little nervous about advancing this slide, which I do not want to do, because I've also been asked to, what's your grandmother's saying? If you think you're miserable, go talk to the really miserable guy, and you'll feel better already. I was asked to just reflect on maybe, there are other scenarios where significant accomplishments have been made in very, very sort of complex arenas, and to this end, I want to talk about 6 dates. The first being 1968. Any trivia fans in here? What happened in I think it was February 1968 in the United States. Actually, it happened in Alabama. No, she's guessing at an event I don't believe that was it, but an event prompted someone to call 911, and it worked. The very first 911 call was placed in Alabama in 1968. Now, technology of the day, imagine the phone you had as a kid at home, right? It had a wire attached to it. It had to reach copper somewhere. That copper wire had to extend to a physical facility at which 911 call takers were available, correct? And it worked. Well, it didn't really work for everyone, because what did state transportation departments resort to doing for the same purpose along roadways in the United States and locals? Call boxes, right? Okay, King, we're not going to reflect on how quickly you remembered that. They placed these call boxes because when you were driving in your car in 1970 or 1980, you didn't have a communications device. And most certainly if you were on an interstate, assuming your vehicle was even drivable, you'd have to pull off somewhere, you'd have to find a payphone, et cetera. So the system really didn't work for all purposes and all things. The second date is 1986. That's the first year I had a cell phone. It was about this big. And whether or not it could dial 911 was a constant unknown, right? Was there a cell phone tower anywhere nearby? Remember all that uncertainty about cell phones? If you could reach a cell tower and could dial 911, were you connected to the right 911 center? Not always, right? And so this became kind of problematic in that the evolution of something called enhanced 911, which would use a system of triangulating the closest 3 cell towers to sort of kind of narrow down where you are when you made that call. Because you no longer had the copper line certainty of a hardwired phone connected to an address on the part of that dispatcher. The next date is 9/11. And the fact that the thousands of individuals from the fire and rescue, law enforcement, emergency medical services, and related emergency response communities could not talk to each other. And if you've ever seen the counts of deaths, law enforcement officers versus firefighters, and ever wondered, why is the number of fire and EMS personnel so much higher than law enforcement officers? You know why? Law enforcement officers could hear the get out of there message on their radio. The fire and EMS personnel could not. So in the 9/11 Commission report, there is damning conviction of the inadequacies of what's called LMR, Land Mobile Radio System, that emergency response organizations came to rely on because they really didn't have a choice across the decades, let alone the lack of interoperability when the police department is on one frequency, the fire department is on yet another frequency, and the ambulance and the hospital are on yet a third frequency. So those inadequacies were very apparent. And then the next date is 2004. Anyone who knows the answer to this, do not shout it out. I want guesses only. Congress established a national 911 office. In what federal agency? Guess? The FCC, sure, good guess. Not. Homeland Security, not. Rural Development, no. USDOT, you get the prize. In the United States Department of Transportation, in NHTSA, that's where the National 911 Program Office resides. Holy cow. Why? Because NHTSA had a very clear understanding of the importance of 911 systems, the evolving technology challenges, and its very direct relationship to transportation incidents, right? The next date is 2012. In 2012, Congress passed a law creating something called the First Responder Network Authority. It was because of the 9/11 findings where, hey, technology is coming a long way, right? Think of the rich interaction you and I could have just using our devices right now. We can text each other. We can send videos to each other. We can do funny memes with Jeff's head on top, right? We can have very long discourse with audio. I can send you a video, right? Think of all the things that we can do. But in 2004, Congress realized there wasn't a single 911 center in the United States that you could do any of that with, except dialing 911 and audio. No way to text a 911 center. No way to send a picture of the bad guy to the 911 center, right? No means of that rich interaction. So what got crafted, and this is wickedly complicated because it's wickedly complicated, is, and it might be a little out of focus, is creating the ability for the caller on the far left to do anything he or she thinks may be helpful, to include alerting 911 in the first place, to the 911 center. The call center's here at spot number 2. I don't think the laser pointer works on this. And the ability to transmit health information, text, videos out to a reliable broadband network that's frequency agnostic compared to the old radio system. And it's dedicated broadband. So just like you rely on a piece of broadband to get your call or your video or your text out, this is dedicated broadband that then can be retransmitted to the appropriate first responders. The final date is 2017, when the FirstNet, as its nickname goes, FirstNet board, awarded AT&T a $6.5 billion 25-year contract to build that half of the system out. But coming back to the 911 centers, there's 4,500 of them in the United States, owned and operated by cities, by counties, by towns, by townships, by parishes. There are 15,000 ambulance services in the United States, probably 20,000 fire departments, and a number of law enforcement agencies in between those two. Think of the number of organizations and people and owners that were necessary to make that happen. And how did it happen? Just center column here, or center row here, by convening the users, by establishing the network, by establishing a system of governance that's not exclusively at the federal level, but a shared governance, establishing funding needs and requirements, technical requirements, coverage issues, because this system's got to work, incorporation of provider perspectives and the hands-on perspectives, and then finally, standards for implementation. So this has been a huge evolution and revolution that has involved thousands and literally thousands of people and organizations. And it's certainly been a long road to hoe, but I'm here just to make you feel less miserable. And so with that, if this is something that I think anyone who cares about people after the collision, after the crash, after the bicyclist colliding with a fixed object, should be monitoring the evolution of FirstNet and the means by which it's going to serve the victims we're all here to save. So thank you very much. And David, you're up next.
I just want to thank Dia. And as she just illuminated with that 911, a lot of times when we think something works, like a 911 call, there's still a lot that we have to do to make sure it's truly having the effect that we're looking for. So it is a doubling down on what works in an interesting way that we think it's all there, but there's a lot more of collaboration and integration that's required to get to the effect that we're looking for, which may be the same for a lot of our double down on what works. So David, over to you.
So I had not seen Dia's slides, but it's a perfect segue, because that's really all about technology, right? And I think the timeline is real interesting of how long it took us to get from where we were, what you said, 1968, to where we are today. And that's part of what this second pillar is all about, is how do we accelerate, which is the key word that's in there, technology, so that it doesn't take us quite this long, right, with what we're talking about. Some things it is going to take us that long, and it's going to take longer than that. Just a reminder of what the pillar of accelerating technology was all about. What we're trying to do is to increase how quickly either existing technology is adopted today, or how quickly we can think about the development of new technologies to address our road safety problems, right? That's really what we're focused on here. And so when we got into this last year and started talking a little bit about activities that we were going to undertake over the course of the year, the biggest thing we wanted to do was really just kind of start marketing Road to Zero and technology. And what we decided to do was to try and be part of existing conferences, existing venues where we had an opportunity to kind of sell this idea of accelerating technology as part of Road to Zero. And over the course of the last year, we've had the opportunity to do that at national meetings, at regional meetings. I had the opportunity to speak at the Institute of Transportation Engineers at their annual meeting. Had the opportunity to speak at the Governor's Highway Safety Association meeting. We've done a number of regional meetings where we've been able to talk about the success of existing technologies, things like ADAS, and that we've been evaluating. The mic died.
That's why we have backup.
Okay. Back in business? Yeah. All right. It's technology. Yeah, we're going to have self-driving cars. This would have what would happen in my self-driving car. But no, I think part of what we're trying to figure out is where we go from here, and how do we create, through the Road to Zero initiative, an environment where we can truly accelerate things. And so there were two focuses that we thought about this track. So when you think about technology, and I think Dia's example of what she just went through is a perfect one. So the work that we do at the Institute, we frame in as the Haddon matrix, right? So we think about things that are going on before the crash, things that we can prevent, during the crash, how do we protect occupants particularly, and then after the crash, which is where the Dia's example comes in, and how do you communicate with 911? And then we think about it in terms of the people involved, the vehicle itself, and then the infrastructure. And there are pieces of technology wrapped up in all 9 of those cells. And I think what's happened, of course, over the last decade is most of the focus and all of the hype has been around the vehicle technology piece. And I think that's a mistake. I think there are certainly things that are in the vehicle now and are coming in the vehicle in the future. They're going to help save lives. But there are a lot of things in the infrastructure side of things. There are a lot of things in law enforcement. There are a lot of things that we can do to change behavior that are associated with technology. And so the way we kind of split this accelerating technology up was thinking about two aspects of it. One is the focus on how do we advance technology that we know exists today that can help save lives today? How do we get that implemented more quickly. That was a big piece of it. So examples of that would include things like ignition interlocks. That's a piece of technology that is out there, that is available, that can be utilized today. And we have evidence-based research showing how well it works. But there are barriers that we have to overcome. There are political barriers that we have to overcome. There are often state and local barriers that we have to overcome to get those kinds of programs in place. Another one is that I talked about on the vehicle side. We know that the ADAS stuff is working. We've been evaluating these systems at the Institute for about a decade now. We know that AEB, vehicle-to-vehicle AEB, will reduce vehicle-to-vehicle collisions by about 50%, and severe injury crashes by about 56%. We know these systems work. We also know that automakers are starting to add pedestrian AEB capabilities to their vehicles. And so this year, when we roll out our 2020 top safety picks in a couple weeks, one of the criteria to receive either of those awards is not only does your vehicle have to receive an extremely good rating in our vehicle-to-vehicle AEB test, it also has to perform well in our vehicle-to-pedestrian AEB tests. So this is the way we're trying to push the automakers forward in terms of getting that technology on their vehicles sooner. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to think through, is how do we accelerate technology? And I really want our coalition members to help think through in their areas of work, how we can push forward in terms of that particular focus. The second focus then was really about setting ourselves up for the future, kind of paving the way for either the development of new technologies to help address known issues for which we don't have solutions yet, and then how do we get those adopted? And that's more of a long-term look. And so when you start to think about all of the work that's going into level 4, level 5 vehicles, the stuff that's way out in the future, that's really where that fits. But there's a lot of work that can be done now in thinking about some of the needs that we have today to address problems that we know exist. One of the big ones is we don't currently have any tools available to help law enforcement when it comes to the issues of impairment. Perfect example of where we need technology, we need research to step in and solve this sooner rather than later, because this is a growing problem that we all know is out there. So those are the examples of the kinds of things that we want to think about. How do we take existing technology that we know works, and this kind of crosses over with Dia's pillar of doubling down on what works too. So think about the issues that are facing us now and the technologies that are available today. How do we get those implemented more quickly? And then how do we prepare for the future? And how do we get developers of technology to accelerate their work in helping address the fatalities that we have on our roadways? So one of the things that we're going to do later, not this month, it's going to be in late March at this point, is we're going to have a working group, and anybody with the coalition, affiliated with coalition, is welcome to be part of that. I don't know the bios of all 1,536 members, so I don't know exactly which individuals want to be part of that. But if there's anybody in this room that's interested in helping think through the accelerating technology piece, you're welcome to be part of that, and we will send out the specific date and time. But I would encourage you to help, help us think through collectively, how do we tackle those two focuses? And how do we move technology more rapidly than it's currently moving? Most of us, there are a few of the coalition members that we have automakers involved, and we've met with them, we've talked with them. Some of the tier 1 suppliers, we've talked with them quite often. We try to push them forward as much as we can and get them to think about these problems and these challenges that we face. But we need more brain power put to this and trying to think through how we're truly going to accelerate things in the future. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of mention at the end here is and I'm guilty of this as well, is we do get trapped sometimes in our silos and areas that we work in. One of the things I'd really like to do is to get enough people together to help think across disciplines, because there are things that we can do in the enforcement community that will help those who are thinking about designing infrastructure. There are things that we can do in the public health communities that will help with addressing how we design infrastructure. There are ways that we can work together more effectively than we're doing now. And I think technology can help bridge some of that working together across these different disciplines. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is one of the things that we're going to try to do this year is going to be similar to Dia described this, and I think Jeff's going to talk about this a little bit, is we are going to try to compile some very basic resources for the coalition that provide some of the most, studies of effectiveness of some of the technologies that are out there, some of the barriers that are out there with regards to implementing technology, and some of the strategies that have been undertaken to overcome some of those barriers. There's not one place right now where I think all of that exists. And so we're going to try to put that together as part of this working group, and we'll have that available to everyone later this year. So I think that's it.
One more working group still to go, and then we probably will have some time for some questions then at that time. So if I could have Jeff come on up, and I know you've got a partner in crime here today too, so I'll let you introduce him.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and it's great to be with this group. As Lorraine indicated, the focus of my presentation is going to be on the third pillar, which is on prioritizing safety. And David Yang, who's the executive director with the AAA Foundation, is going to be my partner in this presentation. We're going to do a little bit of tag teaming. So I'm going to start by giving you an overview of the effort, the work we've been doing. Ask David to come up and talk about the work he's been leading in the area of safety culture. And then I'll come back and talk about the work that I've been leading in the safe systems area. Let's see if I get the right, here we go. Nice graphic there, prioritizing safety. What I show you on the screen here is the definition that was included in the RAND report about the third pillar. And really, it includes two complementary concepts, right? That prioritizing safety is about adopting a safe systems approach and at the same time creating a positive safety culture. And so that's the way we've organized the work we've been doing. As I said, I've led a task force on safe systems. David's led a group on safety culture. And we've tried to use a cross-section of individuals from the coalition that have been participating in these conversations. Importantly, we tried to focus our conversation around supporting implementation. One of the things that came back from a survey that the National Safety Council did of the coalition members about this kind of Road to Zero 2.0 effort was that we really needed more information on how to implement activities and really wanted to see a focus on supporting implementation. So we've tried to take that to heart. If I can get going in the right direction here. One of the things that we've created, and I want to start with this, is this graphic that tries to illustrate the work we're doing and how things fit together. And this was something, if it looks familiar to it, it's adapted from a UN road safety version. But what I've tried to do is reflect both the concept of safety culture and safe systems on this graphic. So you see around the outside safety culture. And I think as David will talk about it, when we think about safety culture, it needs to wrap around and be part of everything we do. And I think that's a very important concept to get, that at the very heart of Vision Zero is adopting this safety culture, which leads us to prioritizing safety. And on the interior, what you see are safe systems and the various components. And this has been reflected in different diagrams in different ways. But I think basically we accept these four components, right? Safe roads, safe speeds, safe vehicles, and safe people. And then we need all four of the components working together and reinforcing one another if we're going to, in fact, create a safe system. The thing that I think that I would want to reinforce that prioritizing safety requires both, right? It's not enough for a jurisdiction to say, we want to have a safety culture, we want to be a vision zero system, we want to get to zero. That's a necessary ingredient to make safety a priority in your jurisdiction. But if you don't then follow through and actually practice safe systems, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean about practicing safe systems, but if you don't actually do things that are going to move the needle, then you're not going to move toward vision zero. So we need both pieces, strong safety culture and active practice of safe systems. The two pieces on that graph highlighted in blue, safe roads and safe speeds, are really where my work group has focused. And I'll explain a little bit more when I come back up here about why we chose to focus on those two pieces. And in fact, that while we need all four pieces, we see targets of opportunity in safe roads and safe speeds right now. So with that, let me ask David to come up and talk a little bit about safety culture, and then I'll be back.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon. As Jeff mentioned, I'm David Yang, the Executive Director for AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. Very glad to have this opportunity for spend a few minutes to talk to you about the Safety Culture Task Force that's under Priority in Safety. I think what we've done is at AAA Foundation, for the past 10 years or so, we've been measuring people's attitude and perception to traffic safety. So I think that's why Jeff reached out to me at the beginning of last year, I think, and asked me to lead this task force. Very, very fortunate, kind of having a group of people from academia, from basically as well from the state government, and also federal government, and also some organization participating in this this task force. What we done last year is we have began really, as we met the first time, we began to talk about exactly what is safety culture. And, you know, after a lot of, you know, when you put a lot of people who has very strong opinion in the room, there's a lot of definition that will came up. And what we have kind of boiled down to is really, there's really two types of safety culture. One is really related to more kind of public safety culture. That is really what the road user, like all of us, whether we are driver, whether we are bicyclists or pedestrian, we're sharing some shared common value related to safety culture. And the other thing is organizational safety culture. And that's really more kind of the common goal being shared within a group of people. For example, the US DOT or the National Safety Council, AAA Foundation, ITE, is what are some of the value you are sharing with your group of people. And so we have, after we have these defined, I think it really helped us to kind of say, okay, this is what we want to be focusing on. But along with the definition, we feel that's not enough. So we added what we call the principles. And the principle is what drive basically creating strategy to implement. I think a lot of time when we have some idea, when we have some concept, that's great. But without actually knowing the kind of how, sometimes you get stuck in certain places. And so what we've done is we have a total of 8 different principles defined. And really kind of focus on, I only list 2 because, I don't want to really crowd up the whole space, but it's kind of logical thinking. Is really you start off on traffic crashes is a significant public health issue. All the way to that logic, when you think about it, at the end is that we need to create strategy to increase action. And what we really feel as a working group is that is very important for us to kind of focus on. And these are really, we really see this as this task group kind of look into is we believe that when you cultivate a positive traffic safety culture, it will propel the deployment of safe system. One of the things we did back in December is we offer a webinar called Safety Culture 101. We ran it through the ITE platform. And we have practitioners there from Washington State kind of share how the safety culture transformed the implementation of safe system. I think that's really kind of go hand in hand. We also believe is that, when you have appropriate traffic safety culture shaped by a road user, it will enhance a safe system. A lot of time when we do a lot of work, when we design engineering work, internal infrastructure or vehicle, or even enforcement, I think we are hoping driver can, or the user can follow certain things. But I think really the most effective thing is that if we can cultivate really a positive traffic safety culture, then that can make all the differences. I think, and really, I think what we want to do is again, as I mentioned, we are in the process of creating a website. Hopefully in the future, I'll be hosted at AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety's homepage somewhere. We will have all the definition, all the principle that has been, and all the available resources that being developed by this task force, and that will be available for people to download. And I believe the National Safety Council has an introduction site right now that's already available. In the future, I'll link to that site directly. As I mentioned, we have we done a safety culture 101 webinar, and that is still available. And one thing that, I just want to kind of share a story is one thing that I was really encouraged because yesterday I had a call with a local metropolitan planning organization, MPO, and they reached out to me and said, well, this whole year, they want to begin to focus on safety culture issue, and they are looking for resources. To me, that is really a something that I think I'm very encouraged by. It's not only this group of people that's talking. I mean, obviously, I'm preaching to the choir, talk to you about safety issue, about safety culture, but other people begin to realize the importance about how safety culture can drive and change the whole organization. So I'm gonna end my remark there. Thank you for your attention, Jeff.
So now I want to shift back and dive down a little bit deeper about safe systems and talk about safe systems in a U.S. context. For those of you that have been part of the coalition for a while, at the beginning of the coalition work through some leadership by NHTSA, we heard a lot from the work that's been done in Sweden and the pioneering work that they did in the area of safe systems. And we've looked a lot at work that's been done in Australia as well. What we need to do is to translate those principles and those approaches to a U.S. context, because the culture is a little different here, right? Our system is different, our geography is different. We have to figure out how do we take the same kinds of principles and bring them into our country. And there's really two fundamental principles that underpin the work that we were doing. Number one, users will make mistakes. Right? We know that drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, all the users out in the system will make mistakes. And our goal is to reduce the opportunity for error in the way we plan, design, and operate the system. And then the second fundamental principle is that the laws of physics dictate, right? At higher speed, we're going to see greater harm. So things that we can do to lower speed and recognize the human injury tolerance will be important to saving lives. Those two principles underpin the safe systems work. We started, as David talked about, starting with definitional work. We started the same way. We started really in wanting to make sure that we explain, and we call it an explanation as opposed to a definition, of what we mean when we're talking about safe systems in the context of safer roads and safe speeds. And you see that definition up here. We're seeking safety through the aggressive use of roadway design and operational changes, rather than relying primarily on behavioral changes. And again, that doesn't mean, and I'll get back to this, that we're excusing user behavior. It says that as the infrastructure owner and operator, there are things that we can do to be more aggressive in shaping that behavior in the way we plan, design, and operate the roadway. And the second part of this explanation is that we really need to fully integrate the needs of all users in the transportation system. You heard the administrator a little bit earlier talk about, while our overall number of fatalities is going down, the number of pedestrian and bicycle fatalities is going up, significantly going up. And at kind of record highs. And so this needs to be an important part of our consideration when we're working on safe systems. So the next step we took after developing the explanation is to create a framework, because we thought it was important to give practitioners something to hold on to when we talk about these concepts and these explanations and these definitions. How do they actually practice it in their work? And so I'm going to drill down a little bit and show you some elements of this framework. I can get my slides to advance. So again, the framework is built around these two key concepts. Drivers are going to make mistakes, and we need to anticipate human error and try to affect human behavior through the way we plan, design, and operate the system. And we know that humans are frail, and we need to think about how we can accommodate human injury tolerance better in that planning, design, and operation of the system. So when we're talking about anticipating and reducing human error, really we see these three areas of an opportunity from an infrastructure owner and operator standpoint. We can separate users in space, keep them apart. We can separate them in time, share the road, but at different times, or the space at different times. Attentiveness and awareness. And I have a slide where I'll give you a sense of these. So separating users in space, right? This is something particularly in the bicycle area we've been started to do a lot more of. DC is a great example, right? We see a lot of use of separated bike lanes and cycle tracks as a way to give priority space to those users. We've done it for a long time with pedestrians, right? Sidewalks. That's giving pedestrians their space in the transportation environment. We need to do more of those things and use more of the kinds of treatments that you see reflected here. Separating users in time. This is one where, okay, we have a particular area, an intersection, right? And we want to get all of the users safely through that intersection. What we've started to see, one of the kinds of treatments where you can separate users in time is a pedestrian scramble, right? Where all of the vehicles come to a stop and pedestrians are free to cross wherever they want within that intersection, diagonally or straight across. We see some of that used here in DC, and we see it much more aggressively in other countries and other places. It can be a very effective way of creating safety for the pedestrian to cross an intersection. Increasing attention and awareness. And here, I think, is where we see opportunities on the infrastructure owner and operator side, but there's also certainly opportunities on the user side as well. We use treatments like lighting in this area. Rumble strips is a good example of how we've used a treatment in rural roads. Again, the administrator talked about rural roads. How have we tried to get the attention from perhaps a drowsy driver or a distracted driver on a rural road? We use rumble strips to get their attention and increase their attentiveness. The rectangular rapid flashing beacon, right? A very effective device that's been used at mid-block crossings, again, to try to get the attention of drivers on the fact that there's a pedestrian present that wants to cross the street. So these are all examples of the ways we can increase attentiveness and awareness. Obviously, we can do it on the user side as well. Retroreflective clothing is a good way to increase the visibility from a user standpoint. The second area I mentioned is accommodating human injury tolerance. And again, there's two areas we see opportunity here: reducing speeds and reducing impact forces. So when we talk about reducing speeds, again, a variety of tools. We have speed limits. We set and enforce speed limits, and that it can be an effective tool. But we would argue, or I would argue, that setting the speed limit lower by itself without any attention to the signal timing, the design of the infrastructure, the way it's operated, traffic calming devices, or other geometric treatments, you're going to be hard pressed to get compliance with that changed speed limit without very intensive enforcement. So we think there's opportunities within the infrastructure to work in hand with automated enforcement where it's present, or regular traditional enforcement where it's present, but also to get compliance with lower speeds. The second area is reducing impact forces. And we have a variety of ways we've traditionally done that in the infrastructure. We do it through breakaway devices, right? When we have to put an object out there, a signal pole, or some kind of object out there that is providing a service to the user, we try to do it in a way that allows us to minimize the impact forces should a vehicle hit it. We also do it with treatments such as roundabouts. Right? Roundabout is a great way to lower speeds entering a conflict point at an intersection. And while you might have a higher number of rear end crashes in that, you're not going to have the kinds of T-bone crashes that we would typically might see at a traditional intersection. So a very effective way to reduce impact forces is through the use of roundabouts. So when we talk about taking this increased responsibility on the infrastructure side, we're not saying that we're absolving the user of responsibility. And I think that's important. Particularly, I think we make our infrastructure owners and operators nervous when we suggest they need to take a greater responsibility. We're not saying that the user has no responsibility. It's clear as users of the system, we all have responsibility for our own personal safety and those that are traveling with us. But at the same time, I think what we're trying to say is that the system user, decisions are also present on the infrastructure owner and operator, that they really need to think about what the decisions they make every day, and mistakes on the part of the user of the system doesn't absolve them of responsibility either. So what will it take us to get to these kinds of practices? And I think it's going to take a couple different things. One is we need to recognize that a lot of the things that we have been doing traditionally and that we know that work, going back to his presentation, we need to use more of, right? There are many things that we have practiced in engineering or the planning, design, and operation of roadways that we didn't call safe systems, but certainly follow the principles that I laid out in that framework. But we also need to be willing to try novel or new things and to use this hopefully framework to guide us in thinking about what are other treatments that we can use that we haven't used in the past that might fit within this. And I think New York City, which has been really a leader in the Vision Zero space, has been very proactive, I think, in trying some of those novel things and evaluating them and understanding what might work in this type of framework. The other thing I think it's important to recognize is that moving in this direction involves trade-offs. That if we're going to provide more time, more space, kinds of users for pedestrians and bicyclists, we may not be able to move as many people through that same space as quickly as we have traditionally. And that's a trade-off we need to make if we're going to prioritize safety and truly have a safety culture. There are also times when we may have to limit the choices of the user for the benefit of the system. And I think that's important to recognize. So these are some of the products we've created to date. The explanation I showed you, the framework that I walked through. We have documented and curated a number of resources, things that we saw out there that we thought, some which come from other countries, but were particularly relevant to the US. We also did an introductory webinar to safe systems, which we recorded. And you can find all of those things at the webpage highlighted there, the IT webpage. They're also now available through the NSC webpage under the Road to Zero page under the resources tab, right? So thanks to the folks at NSC to just quickly put together that webpage in the last week or so, and they will link to these resources if you go through the Road to Zero resources tab. And whoops, sorry, back one, my final slide. Just in terms of our next steps in this area, David mentioned the work that he's doing to complete the safety culture webpage. We're very interested in trying to identify more examples of safe systems. I just gave you a few, but certainly if there are folks in this room that have existing or new practices that they think fit into the framework that I gave you, we'd love to hear about them. You can contact Sarah Abel at my staff, as you see on the slide. And where the work group is focusing right now is developing a prioritizing safety action plan to try to identify things that can be done in the next year, within the next 2 to 5 years, or 5 years or longer that can help us achieve safety culture and advance safe systems. We have a draft of that developed, and we would expect to be able to bring it forward to the coalition sometime in the early summer. Thank you very much.
All right, right, so thank you to David, Jeff, and Dia for hosting our working groups and for presenting today. We do have about 5 minutes. The guy, they kept pretty close to their time, but 5 minutes for any questions, and we'll ask them to come up here if you've got them. So anything for Dia, Jeff, or Dave? Hopefully, I saw a lot of note taking, and hopefully you'll be able to touch them. As was mentioned in the last presentation here, there is now a Road to Zero, no spaces at nsc.org page, and everything will be eventually referenced and available through that page. So we'll make that really simple for you to get to everything. Okay, no questions? One last go. Are there any on the line? Any questions you have? Apparently, yes.
There is one question here. What improvements should be made to novice driver education courses on the Road to Zero?
Any of our speakers want to take that one? If not, maybe Kelly, could you help us with that one? Would you mind coming up and addressing that? She's looking at me with that evil eye. Repeat the question. It's what should be done for novice driver education on our Road to Zero?
Yes.
Hi. I think it's a really great question, and it's an important question that doesn't have a simple answer. I think much like everything with the Road to Zero, it takes all of us pulling the oars in the same direction, to get there. Novice drivers are just one subset of the driving population, and we've got to do a better job of preparing them both to drive in the vehicles that exist today, but also preparing them for more technology that's available in cars that are on the road and that are coming, and then ultimately preparing them for interaction with self-driving cars and that mix of population on the roadway for many, many years to come. So I know working with groups, I know AMVO is in our steering committee meeting earlier today. They're doing great things to really be thinking about novice drivers and education, certainly partnering with the National Safety Council and lots of other organizations out there. But I think the answer is, if there was that one simple little thing to do, we would have done it. And so the complicating factor is how do we all bring our perspectives to the table and really think deeply about it for a solution that's going to last a long time.
Thank you, Kelly. And we do have some resources at the council for novice drivers that if whoever the person is asking the question, if you'd like to get more, just please let me personally know and I'll get you connected with that. Do you have another question, or are you just bringing the mic around? Okay.
In my outreach work with older adults in Washington, D.C., it seems that virtually no one is aware of the Vision Zero concept, and yet older adults are very potential proponents and advocates of safe streets for all. So my question is, what are the working groups doing in terms of communication, especially by government entities, with a population that doesn't live on their smartphone? And what are the strategies that might be coming out that looking through the prism or the lens of older adult, not as vulnerable population, but as actors in society? I think it's 2030, by 2030, there'll be more older adults than school children countrywide.
Wow. Well, thank you. And I think everybody could hear that question. We did just create our communications committee, and our representatives are here in the back of the room. I didn't hear them say anything earlier today about sort of alternate modalities for communicating, especially to populations that may not get, nsc.org or other kinds of communication. So we'll take that for action, if that's okay, and make sure to report back in the future of how we're specifically reaching out to that community. And it just wouldn't be here in Washington, D.C. I would think it would be nationwide. And I think someone from the CDC may have something to add to that, ma'am. Can we bring the mic over here to the corner?
So just to answer your question, at CDC, older adult mobility is one of our priority areas. So we have been working for years to put together a My Mobility planning tool that was released just a year ago. So it's a tool that we did focus group testing with older adults, and it's about mobility more broadly than just transportation safety, also fall prevention. So we have that, and we also just released in December a environmental scan looking at rideshare programs, both for-profit and non-profit for older adults. So we're engaged with a transportation research board and older adults in that sphere. So I can talk to you more afterwards about some of the work we're doing. Jeff?
I might just mention as well that Deborah Alvarez, who's with AARP, has been an active member of my work group, particularly on the safe system side, and she's been very effective in helping us to recognize that when we talk about vulnerable users and we talk about different kinds of users in the system, that we need to recognize, in particular, older users and kind of what their needs are. I also would think that, you know, as we develop further, that AARP and groups like that could be a very important voice in the safety culture side, where we're trying to communicate about the importance of Vision Zero and about creating a positive safety culture. I don't, in the work we're doing, we're not quite ready yet for that, but I think that we're very pleased to have Deborah represent those interests as part of the dialogue we're having.
Thank you. Unless is there another question?
There's one more question in the back.
Online. Okay, great. We'll cause that to be our last question. That'll put us right back on schedule.
Oh, lucky.
And I can't, is there someone behind the pole?
Yeah, I'm hiding. So, but this was for David on the technology side. So with hopefully wider adoption of ADAS systems, it seems like there will be some danger when the drivers get used to that and then they drive a vehicle that does not have ADAS. And so I was just curious what behavioral studies are being done to accommodate that.
Yeah, good question. And I actually think there's two pieces of that we're looking at. One is what happens when you shift to a vehicle with, or from a vehicle with to one without? And we're trying to do research to understand what happens in that regard. There's also very big differences in even moving from a vehicle with to another vehicle with, right? None of these systems currently are designed in the same way. They all work slightly differently. The other big thing that we're looking at, though, that we're probably even more concerned about is, as people get used to these systems, are there going to be potential safety disbenefits introduced, so that you start to create more distraction on the part of the driver, or people start to take their hands off these level 2 systems. These are Tesla crashes, right? These are level 2 systems where people are treating them as something more advanced, as driver replacement systems rather than driver assistance systems. And so we're doing a lot of research now trying to figure out, how do you keep drivers engaged in the driving task when they're using these systems? And how do you get them re-engaged more quickly if they do become disengaged? And so I think all of those things are things we have to think about as technology moves forward.
Thank you for those questions. We're now going to move to another panel, and Brittany Kohler from the National League of Cities is going to moderate for us. So if I could ask Matt, Shirley, and Kim to come on up to the stage. But we're now going to hear from some of our city stories from Cleveland, San Antonio, and New York City. This should be very, very interesting. So thank you.
All right, everybody, if you could please stand up really quickly and actually turn around and face that wall. And then just do a nice wave to everyone who's online. We want to say hello and want to be inclusive. A lot of our cities are watching right now, because one of the things that we're learning, you can turn back around, by the way, sorry. You guys really are good at following instructions. I love that. Our cities across the country are so invested in this conversation from a safety perspective. And I am so excited to have 3 fantastic city leaders here. We are so thankful that they made the trip here. And so I'm going to ask each of them to give you their perspective. So first you're going to hear from Cleveland, then you're going to hear from San Antonio, and then finally we're going to wrap up with one of the oldest Vision Zero programs in the country, our New York City program. And actually, I'm going to have you guys have Cleveland come on up, and we'll have New York City and San Antonio hang here for us. But they're going to give you rapid fire 10-minute talks. And then we're going to sit down and let you ask some questions of them about what they're doing tactically on the ground today to save people's lives. And that is the conversation we want to have in this next few minutes. And with no further ado, I will let the council member introduce himself. He is a champion of NLC and someone who I love to hear from, and I know you will as well. Thank you.
Noon, everyone. My name is Matt Zone. I'm honored and privileged to serve the citizens of the city of Cleveland. I also serve as the immediate past president of the National League of Cities. So welcome to America's City Hall. We open up our doors to any mayor or council member in the United States who are working their way through the Beltway. They have an office away from home here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in Cleveland. When I was president of the National League of Cities, I was so inspired by my colleagues across the country and what they were doing around Vision Zero that I knew that I wanted to implement a Vision Zero strategy in the city of Cleveland. So when we, slide's a little out of order. I'm going to go back if I could. Yep, here we go. I'm going to start here. So when we created our task force, I knew that I wanted to have buy-in from the greater community. Too often, government, we are required, whether it's on the local, state, county, state, or federal level, to solve everyone's problem, right? They all expect us to solve everyone's problem. And I realized that if we were going to really change systems, we had to change minds, and it couldn't just be the city of Cleveland that was doing that. So when we formed our coalition, we were very intentional about making it more than just the city of Cleveland. We have 9 governmental entities that are part of our initiative. We have the city of Cleveland obviously leading it, but our county, our Cuyahoga County, they have many roads that they are required for. Our local MPO, our Ohio Department of Transportation, but the District 12, the region within our area. Cleveland Municipal School District, we wanted the school district. They have a big fleets of vehicles. They have over 40,000 children who go to schools, walking school routes. So we wanted them to be a part of it. Our large public housing authority, we wanted them to be a part of it as well. Our metro parks, which all of our parks and green space and trailways, we wanted them to be a part of it, as well as the Ohio Environmental Council. And there's another one I'm blanking on, but maybe it'll come to me. So when we created our coalition, we passed a council resolution in January of 2018 memorializing our working group. And we set off to create this task force, which we have, we meet every 6 weeks. And in the interim of those 6 weeks, I'm going to jump over. We have 5 subcommittees that meet and report back out. Again, when we set this up, I wanted buy-in from the community. So every subcommittee is chaired by an insider and an outsider. So every subcommittee is chaired by somebody who works inside government, but it's also chaired by somebody who doesn't work inside a bureaucracy. With the local NGO, an advocacy organization, or you're just an expert in that particular area, we all have equal standing. If we're going to change and work towards a day when we have 0 fatalities on our street, it has to be all of us involved in that process. So what we have discovered most is that data drives everything. And I'm going to show you a slide in a minute that's pretty sobering, but we have our data and engineering subcommittee that meets. They look at all of the aspects of collecting that data. And it's just not getting that data from the city of Cleveland, from police reports. It's also gathering the data from our local MPO, but also we're working with the Center for Health Affairs in our region. We have 7 large hospitals. So we're capturing data from our hospitals, because often people go into the emergency room and they're not reporting that they were just in a crash. So we're getting that data too, so we can map out where are all these crashes occurring. We have another enforcement subcommittee, which is led by an advocacy organization and our chief commissioner of traffic enforcement. And they're looking at all ways around creative mechanisms on how we can implement a really smart enforcement subcommittee, working very intentional. And we're working also additionally with our court system to make sure that when people go before the courts, there's equal dispensation of the sentence, but also that we want to have people go through programs and educational workshops so they can not be in that situation again. Our data and evaluation I actually I said design and engineering subcommittee. I said data, just caught myself. We also have our data and evaluation subcommittee that is looking at all that hard number that we're crunching as well. We have an education and engagement subcommittee that is going out into the communities. They're speaking in all of our elementary schools. They're going to high schools. They're engaged with our local safety towns. They're working with, we're doing PSAs. We have, I'm glad the question came about ARP. We have seniors talking about why this is important for them. We have little kids on video talking about why it's safe and why they want this so they can grow up and have prosperous lives. Then we also have our fifth subcommittee is our fleet and vehicle maintenance subcommittee that's looking with all the different technology stuff that you heard earlier today. How can we equip our fleets, our public fleets, but then how can we influence private fleets that are in our municipal jurisdiction to adapt with the changing times? We have a robust program. We're implementing SIGARs on a lot of our heavier vehicles as well. So we passed this council resolution in January of 2018. We've been meeting for 2 years now. In August of last year, we brought in Leah Sham, who's the national director of the Vision Zero Network. We did a one-day symposium. Our task force is made up of 45 people, but at that symposium, we had about 120 people who are part of it because the subcommittees are populated with many individuals. We have just now put out an RFP where we are going to take our work, our collective work. This is the year of 2020, right? We want to go from vision to action. Year 2020 is a year of vision for us, and it should be a year of vision for everyone in this room to really work towards zero fatalities. So this is a map of the city of Cleveland, and as you can see, the areas that are in red are mapped out. They are our high injury network map, and we're in the process of refreshing it. So we have current up to the moment statistics based on 2019. But if you look at that, we have 10,000 roads in the city of Cleveland. About 90% of all crashes happen on less than 10% of our city roads. So if we could just focus in with engineering and design and education around these corridors, we can make it safer for all people. So our education and outreach committee is working in those high crash corridors. They're going to churches, they're going to schools, they're working with people in those areas, educating them around. We have a very active, aggressive marketing campaign. This is a little bit about the subcommittees that we have formed. We've just now created a sixth subcommittee, our policy committee. I authored our complete Green Street ordinance about a decade ago. We've now refreshed it, we're updating it, but we're looking at other aspects of policy, not only in city government, but how can we influence other governmental entities on what they're doing to make our roads safer. So I look forward to the opportunity for some questions. And I guess now I kick it over to, is it NYC or San Antonio? All right. Should I go back? Yeah. You have PowerPoints.
I'm Shirley Gonzalez. I'm a city council member for District 5 in San Antonio. And I'm here also on behalf of the delegation that's in DC. There's about 200 of us here, council members, elected officials, and the chambers to lobby some of our Congress people for funds. And a lot of those funds are infrastructure dollar funds that we're here redirect to our city. And so like many of you all in cities around the country, we have prioritized Vision Zero and the initiative to eliminate fatalities in our roadways since 2015. When I became a council member in 2013, I represent an area of San Antonio that's very high poverty. 93% of my constituents live in poverty, and 97% of us are low income. I'm sorry, 97% of us are Latinos. And so when I was, and it's an older part of the city that has not seen sufficient infrastructure investment over many, many generations. When I became the council member, one of the things that that people would tell me was my grandmother was killed walking across the street. If I vote for you, will you help us make the street safer? And then independently, another person came and said, my child was hit by a car walking across the street here to the university. Can you help us slow down these streets? And these stories were happening over and over again. And so I thought, what is going on in my district that there is so many people getting killed and getting hit by cars just crossing the street, going to church, going to school? And I just simply Googled safe streets, Texas, safe streets. And what came up at that time in 2013 was that New York was having their first Vision Zero conference. And I know Kim is going to talk to you all in a few minutes about Vision Zero and how we got started. But because of my efforts, San Antonio is one of the first cities in the country to adopt a Vision Zero policy. And so we did many of the things that you saw that Matt explained regarding the task forces and having a unified effort. But what I really wanted to focus some of my attention on is equity. I came to hear some of the presentations. What I didn't hear was a redirection of funding for communities of color and disenfranchised communities. Because what we also know is that areas that had less investment in infrastructure had the highest rates of fatalities. So my district, 97% Latino, had a much higher rate of fatalities than other areas around the country. I'm sorry, around the city, especially in the suburban areas, much lower levels of fatalities, pedestrian fatalities in those areas. So what I want to talk to you all about here today, instead of focusing specifically on the Vision Zero initiatives that we've done, and we still have a long way to go like other cities in the country, I want to focus about what we did with redirecting funding for our streets. In 2015, and we became a Vision Zero city in 2015, but that's when I started to really dig deep into the data. So those of you all who love data will understand this. I'm not a data lover. I am a business owner. My entrance into public life was because I was denied a zoning request. So not a whole lot of information about how all of these systems work. But when I started to dig deep with the data, we also knew that areas that had lower pavement condition indexes, so I think you guys know what that means, also had the highest rates of fatalities. So what we said in San Antonio, we're 10 single-member districts and a mayor, and we all represent the same number of people, but funding was distributed equally, 10 single members. 10 districts got exactly the same amount of infrastructure dollars for street maintenance, regardless of the condition of your streets. So I did a very deep analysis to determine where, in fact, were pavement condition indexes, where the PCI scores lowest. And of course, we determined that in areas where we were older, areas of color, had lower pavement index scores. So I was able to lobby my colleagues and the mayor. There were 5 of us that had PCI scores lower than 70. And of course, I was able to get my colleagues who were in that lower than 70 score, and one other member at that time who was term limited, to say we need to redirect funds toward these areas that need them the most. And at that time, we sort of had a changing demographic in our council. I was able to convince all 10 members and the city and the mayor, including the city manager, to redirect funds based on PCI score, not equally distributed by single member districts. That happened about 2 years ago. We're about 3 years into an equity budget. And so what we did was redirected funds to the areas that had low PCI scores, and then added an additional $35 million to do improvements in our city and improve the infrastructure. We've just done that. We all know that it takes time to improve these infrastructures, but what I hope happens as we evolve these conversations with Vision Zero, and as we do many of the safety initiatives that you all have here, we also did in San Antonio. We had a task force. We have had community partners. But the most significant thing we did in San Antonio as a result of the work for Vision Zero and a result of the work that I did with the budget and getting us to redirect funds is that we created equity in every city department. That means 37 city departments in San Antonio use equity in their funding, in funding our city budget. And I hope that when we move forward with the bond, in 2022, we use that same system. So we reinvest in communities that have historically been disinvested in. And that means, I hope, we get more sidewalks, we get better crosswalks. Of course, we get lighting, which I had done many years back, that we get street trees, that we use these traffic calming devices that will not only slow down traffic, so as was demonstrated in some of the previous presentations, you have examples of things that we can do to slow down the traffic, but we also know that street trees, that having public art, that investing in communities also helps not just revive the community itself, but shows that we invest in people and that we care about our communities. So I'm really looking forward to further discussions on that. I'm looking forward to a discussion about equity in all of this funding. We just like, similar to what Matt talked about in Cleveland, 3%, I think for us, 30% of the fatalities are on 3% of our roadways. So why not have the investment in those areas that need it most? And of course, those are all areas where we've had significant disinvestment. They're all communities of color. And so we really need to make those investments as we proceed with making areas safer. So, and the last thing I wanted to make sure that I talked about as we continue this discussion on safety in our communities, one thing that we do in San Antonio, and I suspect in many cities around the country, is that we use level of service as a way also to invest in our streets. And level of service, as you all know, how many cars can you get through in a certain area? And we don't use equity. We don't use vehicle miles traveled. We don't use an equity framework of how the investment in that community might improve the area to determine whether or not that's a good investment. So we look forward to those conversations, expanding it beyond just the safety measures that are listed here. And also, of course, learning from each other and how we make all of our cities more equitable, because I know that it's a challenge for not just San Antonio, but it's a challenge for cities across the country. So thank you all very much. And I will turn it over to Kim from the Vision Zero Network in New York. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I just want to say, Matt and Shirley, are you sure you don't want to become council members in New York City? You're so fluent and so smart about these things. Not to say that the council members in New York they're great, actually, honestly, but you know, you could always use a few more. My name is Kim Wiley-Schwartz. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Education and Outreach at New York City's Department of Transportation. But today I'm really representing the entire Vision Zero task force and all of the people who work at Vision Zero in New York City, and there are many of us. I'm going to go through these things quite quickly. I was asked to sort of do a deep dive into what was working really well, and then also looking at some of the things that were really challenging for us as we're in our 7th year of Vision Zero. So first of all, let's just talk about New York City Vision Zero, like the way we do things, but this is just for those of you who may not know. For at least a dozen years, we've had a little trick up our sleeves in New York, which is that we use paint, often our sidewalk crew, and some little things, much like what Shirley is talking about. When you reorganize streets and make them more beautiful, more organized, it's good for everyone. So this is from a little corner in the Bronx. You can see if you look carefully, no one has any idea where to cross safely because we have not helped them. But also just way too much pavement given to driving. And so here, with our sidewalk crew, we just simply put something in the middle. We don't have to drain anything, so we don't work with the Department of Environmental Protection. And we have these bollards that we think look pretty snazzy, and we put trees in, and then everybody knows where they can cross safely. And it's these small changes that we've had up our sleeve for over a dozen years. So this is when we were invited to start doing Vision Zero by Mayor Bill de Blasio, we were already doing work like this, and we rely on it every day. But of course, when Mayor de Blasio came in 2014, he asked us to sort of reinvent the way we looked at safety. And we use all of the E's and legislation and some other tricks to try to pull off Vision Zero. So what does it mean in Vision, what does it mean in New York City? Oh, I've lost my multi-agency. Oh, there they are. So we have a task force that meets every 2 weeks, but just internally. And it's everyone from the bus operator, folks at MTA, to the people who run the Business Integrity Commission, which is our private sanitation fleets, all the way through to the regular heavy hitters, NYPD, DOT, the health department, and especially our mayor's office. And again, we meet every 2 weeks, which really keeps us honest. Everything is data-driven and evidence-based. And to speak about what both Matt and Shirley spoke about, this does mean that you go to very few streets where your highest crashes are happening. And we have Robert Moses to thank for that being an equity situation, because most of our streets are that have high crashes are otherwise under-resourced neighborhoods, mostly of our Black and brown communities. Our work is resourced. That means we have some money, not a huge amount of money, but when we put our minds to it, the council also will help us, not just the mayor's budget. Many things are non-negotiable. If we find out that there are 12 people and 12 people have been killed along a corridor in the last 5 years, we're going to go after that corridor and we're going to try to fix it. And sometimes we have to make a decision, even if the community is unhappy about it. And this is my job, the ongoing process of culture change. And that really means that, when I started this work 12 years ago and a child was killed in my neighborhood, it didn't even make the paper. Now we had an uptick of crashes in year 6 and every New Yorker is outraged that there's a problem on the streets. So we are really changing. And I'm happy to take the hit for that. Okay, let's go. I'm sorry to break your system. I'm just trying to move forward. All right. So we've been talking about systems, and I do want to talk to you about speeding. I mean, obviously, this is not different than any other place. And like you said, physics always wins. So we have to drive down speeding, and 1 in 4 of our traffic fatalities we know involved in unsafe speed. Now, if we could actually get into the black box of cars, if we could take people's phones and use them to really find out how fast people were speeding, I'm sure that number would be much higher. So at the beginning of Vision Zero, we were able to go to Albany and get the permission to put our speed limit back down to 25 miles an hour. This was very helpful to us. This was great for me as a communications person. That means people found out that it was 25 miles an hour because people, whether you were for it or against it, there were a million news stories about it. And our NYPD started giving out more and more summonses. And so they've been able to start looking at pulling people over and stopping them for speeding. But you can imagine in our small neighborhoods, do we really want our NYPD officers to chase people through neighborhoods who are speeding? Not really. And so what we were able to do was expand greatly our safety speed camera program. And as of July 11th of last year, we have had some remarkable things happen. The first thing is that we are authorized to put 750 school zones worth of cameras up. We do have 1,800 public schools and zones, but that is a lot of places to put cameras. And we are able to put up to 3 in each zone. So that will lead to 2,100 cameras in total. And the hours are now from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays, regardless of whether school is in session or not. And we actually, when we changed the hours on July 11th, we saw that was twice as much exposure to the 100 cameras that we had originally. The locations are a 1/4 mile radius from the school instead of being right next to the school. So that means on an arterial like this, we can actually put a camera if a school is 2 blocks away. And so this has been really helpful to us. And we've been able to put the cameras where they really make the most sense. Some of the keys to our success, the fine is very small and there's no gradation. If you get 10 speed camera notice of liability, they're all $50, so people can't complain that much. They're only issued for speeding over 11 miles an hour, and all NOLs are reviewed by a DOT team. That means the question, how do you know it wasn't me? I wasn't the person speeding. It got the wrong person. That's impossible because we have one human being who sees two different photographs 1 second apart, and one car gets in front of the other car. So we've had almost zero of the tickets actually overturned in the court of law. And all of our cameras are associated with school zones. So as you can see, as we've gone through the years, and towards the end of our 2018 program, we see that camel hump you want to see. That means even though we're still out there giving out tickets, the hump is going in the right direction. I have decided not to show you the 2019 numbers because I do not want to make news here today. Let's just put it this way. When you double your hour exposure and you put up an additional 60 cameras every single month from July to now, we've seen a large uptick in our violations, notice of liability, probably 3 or 4 times that last number there in 2018. But, as we roll them out, we're seeing that, things are really changing. And we are very hopeful that this will be the ticket and the key to changing and getting closer to Vision Zero. Because as you know, if you do, if a conflict happens and you're not going over 25 miles an hour, it's a lot less likely to end in a fatality. So we also use our data to focus messaging. So not only where we go to fix the streets, not only what we do, but we really think through who we are working with. So who's responsible for crashes? I know you guys are all in the business, so you're going to be shocked by this. Men. 80%, actually literally 78% of men in 2019 were responsible for fatal crashes. They were behind the wheel in 78% of our fatal crashes. So we've got to do the work. We've got to try to get the attention of male drivers, and our men 21 to 29 are still drinking and driving, even though we have the greatest transportation and transit system in the world. So I can't figure it. So when we first started doing this work, we went very graphic. This is our 2014 messaging. This was our Your Choices Matter. And again, trying to flip the culture to say it wasn't that crazy pedestrian who ran out in front of you. It was that the driver was going too quickly. And as you can see here, one of the indications is that that's a female pedestrian, and that's a married pedestrian. And so the idea was to try to, appeal to her spouse. Let me go back. So our most vulnerable users, it still is true that 12% of our seniors population makes up still at least 36% of our fatalities. In a couple of years, they've made up 50% of our pedestrian fatalities in New York City. This means that when seniors are being struck by vehicles, they are very likely to die. And traffic crashes are still a leading cause of accidental death for children 5 to 14. So after we developed that first Your Choices Matter campaign, we started to skin this differently by showing who was impacted in that silhouette and always using data. New Yorkers love data. They want to know what's going on, and they respond very well. Like 78% of pedestrian crashes occur in the crosswalk. This is very helpful for people to understand. And eventually we led to this campaign, which we call Signs Affectionately, or Driving Isn't Easy, but Saving a Life Is. And in this campaign, we do both slow down and turn slowly. And these are actually the men and women of the Department of Transportation. We absolutely have the most beautiful agency. We also go to where we know that our populations will be. In this case, we are at the stadiums. This is the Staten Island Yankees and the Brooklyn Cyclones. Both our Mets and Yankees are very wonderful, explicit partners. We also partner with the Nets and the Islanders. Can't get into Madison Square Garden, but those are the Knicks. So it's going to be fine. But we've had a great partnership with these guys all along. And the most important thing is once you do decide what you're doing, go to where the crashes are occurring. So here it's kind of hard to see, but here are 25 locations from 2018. And we do something very similar to what Matt talked about. We literally go out onto the street. So we stop all drivers, we have conversations with pedestrians, we ask people what they need to have different along those corridors where we go. So this is my street team, and we work side by side with NYPD. Wherever we go, if we're there for 2 weeks, it's followed by stepped up enforcement, and everybody knows that that's coming. And so we rotate throughout the city. Also, whenever possible, try to find places to put your ads where you know people are driving. As you can see, this is at the pump. These are in places we know are high crash corridors. Also, whenever we can, in the traffic environment, so that's on the side of a bus. But my favorite place is on the back of the bus, because what I know is that the person who's reading it is definitely driving. And this is one of these things where we'll often have these go all the way up and down corridors. And we will put, again, our signs campaign wherever we possibly can, where we know people are driving. And if you see one of these, the indication is that it most likely is a high crash corridor. So we have some challenges ahead. As you can see here, we started out going great guns. We actually had 5 entire years of reduction in fatalities. This is unheard of in our business. But last year we did start to see an uptick in fatalities, and particularly in our pedestrian fatalities. And as you can see, we had this unexpected drop from 2016 to 2017. This is how we know things were starting to really work, but it has been difficult. And particularly last year, we had a huge uptick in our cyclist crashes. Now you can see this goes up and down, and we do expect it to go up and down, but we started to see real changes. One of the things that we've often seen as well is our throttle e-bikes. They're actually illegal on the streets of New York City, but people use them all the time. You can see here that when we started to declassify them as motorcycles and putting them rightfully in the bicycle category, this is one of the reasons why we had a change in our numbers, but that's not really an excuse. We feel that we need to do a lot of work. And what we understand now is that large vehicles, particularly trucks and particularly sanitation trucks, Packer trucks, are a big problem on our streets. So once we started to really understand this and also see that there are many senior pedestrians who are also struck by large vehicles, this is what we've decided to do. So we've looked at the data and we're going after the problem. So our trucks response team has mapped out 70 priority truck corridors. This is where we'll be putting enforcement. This is where the street team education will go. This is where we're going to do the work. And we're going to strengthen that truck enforcement with our precincts. So not just the NYPD officers who work with trucks, but at the local precinct level, looking for trucks that are off route. This is where children really run into problems, literally and figuratively, with trucks. We have a Vision Zero large vehicle working group, which we have now added. So that's any of the agencies that have large fleets, sanitation, FDNY, many other folks who have the large vehicles. We've created a city driver training program that really has city drivers understanding where to look for pedestrians and particularly cyclists. And we are now reaching out to train private fleet companies with this bike and ped safety. We know that they do a great job with their training programs, but we're trying to fine tune that to really look for peds and bikes. So we've created this data-driven education program called I See You. And this is what we put together for our fleet drivers, really talking to them about making that compensation for looking for cyclists from a stopped position and moving straight as you're driving straight, and also as you're making your turns. And we're really appealing to lots of folks in our fleets. And so this is what we're rolling out in 2020, really looking at bikes and trucks. And you'll probably hear a lot about that in New York City this upcoming year. Lastly, I just want to thank, as I always do, our advocates. We have the greatest group of advocates in the country, Families for Safe Streets. We are always grateful to families like Sammy Cohen-Eckstein's family and Allison Liao's family, who are willing every single day to go out with us to talk about why this matters. If you can, surround yourself with your advocates, have them tell their stories. It makes all the difference in the world, and I thank them. Thank you very much.
introduce these folks, I've gotten 2 outreaches from San Jose, California, and from Albuquerque, New Mexico, saying thank you so much for our work, as we are doing work that we want to share with you and are excited. I also just want to give them a shout out and say that this is a great conversation that our cities are having and encouraging each other in. And so I'm excited to dive in a little bit. So each of you has been a part of the Vision Zero effort in your community for a while. And I'd love to just run down the row. And as you started Vision Zero, as you dived into this and really thought about what your community needed to do and started talking to them, tell us about how your program, if you will, grew up, what got it started, and then how is
Do you want me to kick it off? So it was July 2016. I received a phone call that every neighborhood-based council member hates to receive about a young child who was hit on a street in my district. The street was Franklin Boulevard. It's 2.2 miles in length. And I rushed out there, and it was just a horrendous scene. And the best public policy I've ever led has always originated from the community. It's trying to be representative of what the community wants. So we started we received a grant, a TLCI grants, Transportation for Livable Communities initiatives that many MPOs gives out, to do a thorough analysis of this corridor. And we quickly realized that it was one of the high crash corridor networks. At the same time, I was just about to become president of the National League of Cities. So I was learning more and more about this work, and was really determined to make sure that that never happened on that street again. And so that was my motivation.
Yeah, I guess our story is kind of really the opposite, is really top-down story, which is, it was January 15th of 2014. I had a new boss for 2 weeks. And he gave us 4 weeks to put together a comprehensive Vision Zero plan and announce it and begin to implement it. Polly Trottenberg, who is my boss, had to come up at, not even in her capacity from Washington, D.C. She wasn't even appointed yet. So we scrambled around, and I think the thing that I still love about those 4 weeks was just the camaraderie. It was the first time I'd really sat down with police officers day after day, really asking them what they had seen and what they wanted to be different, and sort of really starting to realize that there were all of these amazing places. I've been working in schools for a long time, but I hadn't really met all of the people in the communities who worked in and around schools. So, that's how our grew very, very differently. And we started with 61, sort of relatively arbitrary ideas that we put into a platform. Now we have 212, I think, that we report on every year. But so ours grew really differently from the top down. But I think it was still has been incredibly. There's been a lot of trust and love put into the process.
So I think we're still evolving in San Antonio, Texas. We love our big trucks and love to drive everywhere. But I feel like we have the infrastructure in place. We did the marketing, and I think we've done the easy parts, and just in terms of having the task force and working on the big fleets that we have a little bit more control over. I feel like what we're still waiting for that's been lacking in San Antonio is that we still don't have the public support. So when you had a top-down mentality, or the way it came to San Antonio was through the top-down. I, as an elected, learned about this stuff. It came from the community, but I initiated it in our city. I got my colleagues to support it. We became a Vision Zero city. We learned from New York, who had the Vision Zero network, and implemented many of these things, but the community still hasn't caught up to it. So when there's controversial issues about road diets, we still get a lot of pushback and have not overcome that part of it yet.
So as you think about your story, I think each of you touched on data a little bit.
data from a reason for why you're acting, data from how do we target. So tell us a little bit about who your data resources are and what data you're using that's really impactful.
Oh, I think so. I'll just, most of it is coming from our TCR department, our transportation department. So the crash corridors, it comes from the police department and from the hospitals. But I believe that as the representative, I have to be able to read between the lines. And as I mentioned about most of these high crash corridors being in communities of color, and the communities not often trusting their local government because they feel they haven't been invested on in a long time. I think that hopefully we can use those numbers as well to redirect the funding and also just improve the quality of life of the people who live there. So that's a different metric that I believe that we haven't gotten to yet. And I know in the Vision Zero networks in New York, as we're trying to make our streets safer and trying to invest in our communities, we do have to make sure that those investments do improve the quality of life of those who live there. And that's much harder to quantify.
It was inspirational for me to hear you, Shirley, talk about how you're reapportioning funding for improving mobility within your city. We did it the same way in Cleveland, and it took a monumental effort to get my colleagues to walk away from that concept that each one deserves an equal share of funding. And so looking at the data, really the data drives everything. The one thing that I learned from Leah Sham, who's the national director of the Vision Zero Network, is the data drives everything. And so we really focused in on it. We have a good system that we can capture a lot of what is being reported from our police department. And you heard me early on in my presentation briefly mention that we also work with our local MPO, but now we've reached out to the healthcare community. When you think about in the 70s, when the late 70s, I think it was, the seatbelt law came into effect. I'm not quite sure when that was. What do we know? It was about late 70s. It was really our hospital industry that was helping people to understand why you needed to put on a seatbelt, or even with the crash test dummies. And so for those who want to create a robust Vision Zero strategy within your communities, lean on the hospitals, the healthcare sector in your communities, because they capture a lot of data when they're filling out the reports when people are going in. Often people will be in a crash. They won't even wait around for the police, and then they'll leave, and you won't even know about that incident. So really the data should drive everything, and it really should be a public policy decision, not a political decision on how we improve these communities.
Yeah, and a shout out to my sisters at Safe Kids who know all about this, right? The injury prevention coordinators are the women and men who have their, they have their fingers on the pulse of, especially in the Trauma One centers. We have 21 of them in New York City, and it's our pleasure to host them as part of Safe Kids. I think for us, we also get our data from three places, right? The cops that then go through the Department of Transportation, which we also work with the state on, and then we work with the health departments. But I think that there's just like there's just this exquisite elevation of understanding of data at the Department of Transportation. I cut it out of my roadshow here, but I usually talk about two different initiatives. One is the left-hand turn calming treatment, and you showed somebody showed our left-hand turn calming treatment earlier, which just came out of this just like unbelievable combing through of what was really causing injuries on New York City streets. And it's not just left-hand turns, it's from one-way streets onto two-way streets. And there's all of this stuff that they learned that way. And these little tiny micro ideas, or our Dusk and Darkness campaign, as we all know, when we turn our clocks back, we have some deadly times. But in New York City, we see this really huge pervasive spike throughout the 4 months. And so we do a huge enforcement and education campaign, and we've seen sometimes as much as 40% reduction in fatalities in that time just by being able to get that out there. So using the data to, get down into some funny nitty-gritty stuff can really help when you're trying to get to zero.
So go ahead and start thinking about what your questions are, because you'll get a chance to do that as well. But I know that there are a lot of cities that are going to be listening in today. And I wanted to just say that they are interested in picking up and learning from you. And I think you've learned from each other along the way. San Antonio, you mentioned New York City and that. So what is some advice that you would give the other cities who might be picking up this Vision Zero concept and rolling it out to their communities? How would you tell them to get started?
Again, I mean, the best public policy I've ever led is emanated from the constituencies that I represent. And I don't, I'm glad that, you know, when by bold action, a mayor could just declare we're going to do this, but often it has to really rise up from the community. And so we have about 50 ambassadors, people who are really passionate around calming their streets. We have a whole initiative that a local nonprofit in our city started this marketing campaign about heed the speed, 20 is plenty, even though our state legislature, kudos to New York City for having Albany giving you the authority to make 25 your speed limit on our city streets. We have this arcane law in the state of Ohio that if you're a through roadway and you're greater than 1 mile, it must be signed at 35, and we can't go around that. And, you know, so those are things that are so frustrating, and the community has really responded in a positive way. I'm now beginning my 19th year of serving as a local elected official. I'm always inspired by people who are willing to lean on government and help them do better. And that's why when we set up our subcommittees, the 5, now we have 6 subcommittees, I made sure that there was, again, a city person as well as an advocate who are co-chairing that working group. That natural friction makes government work better. That's what makes the diamond shine.
So I think most importantly, always, it's a community-based initiative. But because we've evolved a little bit, I think when we first started Vision Zero in 2015, one of the things I learned only recently was that it's actually our city code that required us to use level of service in the designing of our streets. And so one way that a city may begin without having to have all of the political structure in place and having to get so many partners together, find out if your city uses level of service to codify their street design. Because if you have that as your base layer, you really can't do anything else. And so I'm learning the hard way after many, many years that I wish we had started there.
That's really important. So it doesn't really take an entire program to get started. It can just be a few actions to get started and looking into your code. That's really great advice, really helpful. And so the one thing you mentioned is, you know, sometimes there are other laws, state laws, federal laws, just limitations perhaps that maybe we need to think about removing. And so I would love to hear from you all, you know, how you believe we can collaborate better, maybe remove some obstacles. I know there's probably a variety of things popping into your mind right now, but collaboration is a key. It's what keeps Washington working, and how we hope to kind of move things forward, particularly in this season where Congress and others are thinking about transportation. So what would you say are some ways that we can collaborate a little bit better from the local level up? And maybe, you know, what obstacles would you like to see moved out of your way?
Along our lakefront, we have this beautiful lakefront that looks over Lake Erie, but we have 2 impediments to reaching our greatest natural resource. We have a high-speed highway, and we have a high-speed rail line with 100 trains a day. So we were in the process back in 2010 in giving that highway a road diet and slowing traffic down. Well, we were receiving federal highway dollars, and we were receiving a lot of state dollars, and if we were going to go below a certain level of service, we would be ineligible from receiving those dollars. Well, thankfully, our federal delegates worked with the federal DOT. We were able to get a waiver. It took many, many years to get that, but we were able to slow down a signalized road at 50 miles an hour albeit 35, still though much slower, and make the enhancements to it. But those are the things that local government stumbles upon all the time, is that, you know, whether it's state government or federal government says, well, if you drop below a certain level, then you're ineligible for our funding. And so, you know, we have to really change the mindset of not only policymakers, but engineers and people who work in important positions at the federal and state level to understand that really local governments really know how to apply the appropriate applications that meets the needs and challenges of those distinct and unique communities. And it's hard to have one set policy for as diverse as our country is.
I do think that NACDO is doing some great work, and that's the city transportation officials organization. And I have seen many states starting to really look at those things because they're working. So you can kind of ask, especially at the state level, for those DOTs to look at that and the MPOs to look at that. But that is difficult. I think for us, somebody sort of asked about education, driving education. And I think we do find in New York City that, if we would like to see more inroads on the state level to driver's education, especially in our urban environments. There's really not enough work that's been done around, all of the new infrastructure, especially bike infrastructure, and changes in, some of the, things have really changed. And I think it is very difficult. And I certainly don't fault the DMV in New York State. I just think that there's sort of an arcane way of doing it. You're supposed to do it via legislation, right? And that's hard to get to. So for us, we'd like to really see that really changing because, urban environments, they're just really different.
Yeah.
Of course, that's why I'm here in DC, is we're advocating for funding. And the priority is always infrastructure dollars. I'm sure every city in the country is fighting for those infrastructure dollars, but the ability to use them as we see fit. So, or the cities do. And we are asking for infrastructure and transportation dollars, hoping to redirect those to our public transportation agency, which the state currently won't allow us to use for transit. So in Texas. So that needs to change. And then hopefully we can have more flexibility in how we invest.
Right, now is the fun time. And I know we have some microphones on the sides here. Would you like to ask the first question?
Hello? Yes. Hi, my name is Cole Zakara from Smart Growth America. First, thank you all for not just your remarks today, but for all the work that you're doing to support Vision Zero. My question is for Councilmember Gonzalez. The relationship that you described between safety disparities and ethnicity and income, unfortunately, is not unique to San Antonio. Our research shows that people walking in lower income communities, people of color, as well as older adults, are disproportionately represented in deaths among people walking. So the strategy that you describe of shifting toward a funding model that is based on data and based on equity, I think is a really important one to see adopted more broadly. But unfortunately, and I'll make some generalizations here, many of the communities that we work in, what we see is that the areas that are already well resourced, which tend to be wider and wealthier, are also more vocal about demanding investment and improvements. So my question is, how do you overcome that resistance in shifting away from a squeaky wheels model toward one that is more centered on equity and driven by data?
Well, when we first did the research, we used PCI scores, which was also something that was very neutral. And that was how we did it. I wasn't crazy about that because I'm not an engineer. I'm not a particularly data-loving person. As many, I understand that policy has to be data-driven, but it's just not how my mind thinks. And so we were able to just use PCI score to redirect the funds. And that was, I felt, hard to argue. And so that was how we did it initially. But very early on, one of the ways that I just built public trust, and I actually learned it in one of the very first conferences, I think it was either NACTO or Vision Zero conference, was to do the really easy things first, like lighting. And the communities, they're not necessarily, they are independently saying, please help us keep our community safe because our kids are getting killed but they're also saying it's very dark here. And so there's still the same infrastructure dollars in many ways. We know that having better lighting improves safety of cars. And that's all people ask for. So when we went and did the lighting first, it then built trust in the community that we could then do other things as well in the community, because even sometimes the community themselves were very resistant to changing, especially when it came to a road diet. So for many of you all, I understand that many of you all are in sort of just the engineering part, but using the PCI score also worked. And that took a little bit of the fight out of everyone when you have neutral numbers.
Great question. The high crash quarter that I showed in Cleveland, every single street with the exception of one was in a community of color, in a low income community. I think if we did an analysis throughout America, that would come up over and over again.
Yes. And even one thing, for example, but we did have PCI scores for streets, but what we didn't have was like a score for sidewalks. And so sidewalks, there was no measure for that. So they're just measuring gaps. But we know any kind of investment in those communities are going to slow down traffic, and lighting, sidewalks, trees, landscaping, all those things will help slow down traffic and ultimately save lives.
We have another question.
Hi, Brooke Taylor with Daimler Urban Mobility, and this question is for all three of the panelists. I noticed a trend, and I appreciate hearing it over and over again, but data does drive everything. So are there any external sources of data that you're using or experimenting with to get below the surface level of just crash data? Anything on hard braking or near misses that is used to do predictive modeling so you can understand where there are dangerous corridors emerging and start to understand if there is a potential for crashes so that you can prevent them?
I'll give a shout out to our bike advocacy organization, Bike Cleveland. Just Google Bike Cleveland, go to their website. We create it, and we're starting to import their data of the close call form. So they literally can fill out, right? We have a state law, must be 3 feet from a cyclist. There's the ability to, if a car or a vehicle came close, nearly hit, or even hit somebody, you can instantly from your mobile phone upload it. You could take a picture and upload that. It goes to a bike advocacy organization. We're just, kind of beta testing that now, but our hope long-term is that our local MPO will take that over, and there's a way that we can, people can always manipulate data. And I know those who serve in government are always worried that we don't want that to be the case, but it looks very promising, and really proud of the work that they're doing.
So for us, we're really looking forward to the Department of Citywide Administrative Services has put the GeoTab program into all fleet vehicles. I think we're almost there now, including our school bus operators, which are not even part of, they're technically not even New York City drivers. So this, we have 70,000 registered drivers plus 10,000 of those folks who will be driving school buses. That's going to give us a lot of data because they spend most of their days driving, right? So we're going to start to get those hard braking, those places where it's too easy to start speeding, and all of that real-time information. Plus, it also helps us with behavior change among city drivers, right? So we have those two things going on at the same time. It's going to take us a little while to be able to really use that for sort of forward-looking changes, but we know it's coming.
So I'm still trying to get to how do you quantify quality of life improvements, and how do you quantify, does this street investment that reduce the traffic improve the air quality in the area? Still, some of those things that I think, does this investment reduce vehicle miles traveled? And does it increase transit levels, which I feel like we don't have yet. I know that we have all the near miss data, and we have a lot of that crash data, and it still seems like it was. I'm not exactly sure how they're using it. I'll be very honest, because I was kind of trying to focus on those other quality of life issues. So representing a very low income community, we know that a redirection of funds for street maintenance is just one of the very beginning things we have to do. That's why it was so important that when we were able to use PCI score, that nobody could argue and we could redirect funds that way, and that we had the foresight to then use it in every city department, in libraries, in public safety, in parks, in all of our 37 city departments. How does that improve the quality of life of people? And we still, I think we still don't have that data. I don't have a way to measure it. I'm sure some smart person here can figure it out.
Questions? I would also just say one of the things that we would say to you as partners in the safety mission is that each of the cities on this stage, and you saw a Vision Zero city map across the country, they're all looking for your help and your reports, your data, your outreach. And so I would also just say that this is an open collaboration, and many of you have groups and networks behind you. And so how can we work together to make Vision Zero and some of these efforts really shine as examples of how we save lives in each and every city across the country? So with that, are there any other last questions? Oh, there we go.
Your cities, how have you involved the motorcycling community in your Vision Zero efforts? And if they are at all, we find often they're not. We have San Francisco has done a really good job of working with their motorcycling community there, and we would like to see that example reproduced. I work with a lot of motorcyclists in New York City, and they feel like they're the targets rather than somebody who's trying to get any benefit from it, and they'd really love to see that changed.
I'll speak to that.
Yeah.
So actually, I oversee the Motorcycle Advisory Council, which is a part of the New York City Traffic Safety Board. So I think just where we are is we're a fairly nascent group. We've been at it for a little less than a year. And that group is my favorite day of the month. And they come to my office at 6 o'clock at night. They don't leave until 9 o'clock at night, and they're smart and they know what they're doing. And they challenge me on policy and safety. So it's just that we were late to the game with that. I mean, your criticism is very valid. I think, and we saw a reduction in crashes, in motorcycle crashes in New York City, because a bunch of motorcycles were taken off the street because they weren't properly registered. And we saw a very small temporary change. And now they've pointed out to me, and they're right. Like, why weren't they a page of, at the Department of Transportation? Why isn't there a safety plan for motorcyclists? So we've heard the message, and we've completely changed our tune this last year. And we did see a change, a lowering, but again, I think part of that is we took some of those electric bikes and we made them bicycles this year. But we're still seeing, a really big change. And we think with congestion pricing, we really need to make room for motorcycles. And so, we've had to really grow in that area.
I have my endorsement. I'm a rider. I always wear a helmet. And
you wear the gear, though. That's what I've learned.
Yeah, no.
To wear the gear.
Gear is important, yeah. Did not see the city of Cleveland up on that Vision Zero map yet. We've been working at this initiative for 26 months. We've just brought on a consultant who's going to collect our collective body of work and write our roadmap moving forward. Then we will make a public declaration later this year, probably in June or July of this year. Having said that, though, we've identified constituencies that we want to grow and have their voice represented in this conversation. Right now, cyclists, scooters, those types of different modes of mobility, walkers, joggers, runners, they've been very vocal in this 22-year process. The cyclists, not so much, the bikers. And I felt like I've needed to be their voice and represent that, but they will be a part of it. It's a brilliant suggestion, and we want to bring them on early for sure.
Yes, a great suggestion. Thank you. I have to say, I don't know about the motorcycle. I'm an avid cyclist myself. I feel the same way Kim does about my Bicycle Mobility Action Committee, of which I chair. And I think they're my favorite people in the world, all the cyclists. But I feel like perhaps we haven't done a lot. So thank you for bringing that up, and we can try to move the needle in that regard also.
Well, I want to jump in and just say one relatively controversial thing, which is, I think we really, if you're talking about getting to zero, people are worried about the exposure on a motorcycle. And so I think that was misguided, right? I mean, people are going to ride motorcycles, and not everyone who rides motorcycles is, some crazy motorcyclist who doesn't care about their safety, right there. I mean, I have an assistant district attorney in charge of vehicular homicide who rides a motorcycle every day to work. And she's been really helpful to help us understand, like, the way that you include motorcycles is not by hoping nobody rides a motorcycle. I mean, that's a ridiculous way of dealing with Vision Zero. So, sometimes we have to really be challenged.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
All right. So last question is about how we inspire others in our community to really think about these issues and to ask them to partner with us and be in this road to zero with us. Tell us, just as you kind of talk to your community, give us your tag speech, if you will, your quick speech on, why be a part of this? Why join our network? Why be engaged in this? Take it any way you want, but give it a shot.
Well, I mentioned it already, but when I received that phone call in July of 2016, and I like to tell why we're doing this initiative through stories of people. I thought you did a great job, Kim, of illustrating and having people tell their story and why this matters. We're doing public service announcements with senior citizens. We're doing public service announcements with grade school children, telling why they want to walk safely to work, why individuals want to walk or ride a public transportation to the grocery store. And so we're trying to have them tell their story so they can reach their peers and break down those barriers. Because for most people in America right now, probably not the young millennial generation, but when we went through driver's ed, it was all about the vehicle, and it was about driving the road and how you can get safely from point A to point B, and nobody else on the road really mattered. And now there's all these different forms of mobility that are on our street, and I think we really have to be very cognizant that there are other users on the road, and having people tell stories really can help and make a difference.
So having people tell their own stories is always the best way. And we know that to shift any culture, whether it's to have a Vision Zero culture, or whether it's to encourage people to vote, or trying to encourage people to vaccinate, or whatever it is, the best way to do it is peer-to-peer. And so having those personal stories and having people be advocates is always going to be the best way to move the needle.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that's really taking the inspiration from the outside to the inside, whether it's the folks from the motorcycle community or, as we spoke about, it's my job to work with and meet every person who loses a child in a crash, and that just keeps you really honest. But for me, I just don't think that there's going to be another time in the history of this country where people are going to be able to put their resources together with technology, communications, things like that, and actually see something change. I mean, even though we had a small uptick in the 6 years I've been doing this, we had a 30% reduction in fatalities. It's 100 additional people. We went from 300 people a year to almost down to 200 people a year. That's 100 more people I've returned to their families each year. And that's a big deal. And I just don't know that as policy wonks or engineers or data folks or politicians, we ever get a chance to be this brave. And I think we just need to do it because the time is now, and it's going to work.
Thank you all for your work and for being here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Stay here for a minute if you wouldn't mind. I just want to thank Brittany, and our three amazing panelists here for bringing to life what it is to make it really happen. You are all saving lives, as Kim just told us. We just need to do it. And that does take courage. It does take being brave. It takes collaboration. It takes integration. And it takes fortitude. So thank you for bringing that to life. This was a wonderful way to end our session. I just want to give my huge thank you so much. And change the world, change their local communities, and ensure that people go home safely. And that 100 people in New York City, that can be force multiplied time and time again throughout the cities in our nations if we all put our minds to it and work together. And that's really what this coalition is all about. So thank you for being here today. I want to thank the League again for hosting us. Where did you go, ma'am? She's here somewhere. Thank you, thank you. This is a wonderful venue for doing this. Thank you. Part of coming together is to make sure that we can lift each other up, that we can bring one and one together and make at least three, if not more. But it's also about making sure we're not duplicating efforts, that we're seeing what other people are doing, reaching out and making sure to use their best practices so that we can perhaps work on something else. And we hear some great best practices up here today. But this coalition has been around for about 3 years. We have so much more to do. We'll be looking to make sure the next year is as impactful as the past years. We do need your ideas of things that are working, not working. And I want to be real clear. I did misspeak yesterday or this morning about what our website is. So there's a website and an email. If you want to send your thoughts, your advice, what do we need to do differently, that would be to roadtozero@nsc.org. Got it right? And if you want to go to our website to find all of the materials that some of the committees have presented here today, that would be nsc.org/road-to-zero. Sorry for the confusion there, but that's just the nomenclature that would be helpful to use. If you send us an email and you're looking to get to the website, we'll help you make sure you do that too. Again, just thank you. You can please signal boost us by tweeting out or sharing in social media the events here today, the products that you heard about, the efforts that you heard at these amazing 3 locations. So please do make sure that you can share to your broader community, and we have lots of materials to help you do that. You are all saving lives by being here today and collaborating. I want to thank you for your initiatives. We look forward to further engagements in the future. Have a safe trip to wherever you're going, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you to those across the webinar as well. Thank you.